Konnichiwa, 皆さん。私はフレッドです。ここはシャッフルのワークショップ。日本語終わりです。That's all I can do in an easy way. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Fredrik. This will be the first workshop for Shuffle. I haven't done this one before, but I'm sure it's going to be exciting. I am really looking forward to trying to explain all the complex parts of this platform that has been built over the years and how it's been built, who it's for, what it's for, who I am and why you should trust me to build this, and how I love open source, which I hope a lot of you guys do too. By the way, if you feel like I should slow down, if you feel like you don't understand my English in any way, if you have any questions, just tell me and I'm trying to pay attention to the Slack, which I have here on the side. And I will try my best to answer all your questions. So since this is a workshop, I would really like for it to be a two-way conversation and not just me saying things without anything else. So please ask any questions you have all the time, and I will try my best to answer. So first of all, this is Shuffle. This is Shuffle's logo, which has been made a long time back. The focus of this whole workshop is for you to understand a bit more of what Shuffle is, how it works, like really how it works. And I will try to, based on your feedback from the questions, the polls yesterday, I will try to change it into following what you guys want instead of just the track that I've made here. So the main focus right now for the standard version of this is to go through the user interface, which is basically related to how do we make workflows, how do we control an organization, how can we use files, how can we have users and access rights and creating workflows and integrations together and all that kind of stuff. And I'm really excited about it. So here's the general outline for today. And the introduction will be quite brief. The introduction can go on a little longer depending on how far into different things we will go, which are things like I'm going to start by talking about organizations and how organizations can use this in general and how it will be good for MSSPs in the future. So as you can see here, this is quite a packed agenda. But the main part is basically at 12:30, that's in 1 hour. We will have a break, like a lunch break. And before then, I aim to have talked about, both organizations and a little bit about workflows and how they work. So we'll start from scratch and work our way up into really, really complex things when we are done. And I hope in the end, after having created some basic integrations and played around with them, that we'll be able to solve some of your real use cases. Because what I'm most excited about here is to talk to you and understand what you might want to solve so that we can do it together. I can also show some things related to debugging. I can show things related to collaboration and working together, related to how you can use GitHub to make this more efficient, how we've created sharing mechanisms in general, etc. There's a lot we can go into. But again, as I said, the main focus, especially now for the start, will be towards workflow creations and organizations and app creation, and using the apps, of course. Yeah, so here you can see kind of like the basic parts. On the left-hand side, there's a playbook editor, where you can see a lot of apps being like shown on the left-hand side of the image. I'm not sure if you can see the cursor here, but it's over here. And here in the middle are are the actual workflows. I'm sure most of you, based on what you answered, you've seen this before, but I'm hoping there are some new people here as well that haven't seen this. So I'm just going to take it from scratch. I'll go faster and faster as you guys understand more. And these are all apps that are kind of connected together. And this is kind of how the whole system works. It's a way of having Python code shown in the user interface to help everyone understand more of what's going on at all times. In the middle is the app creator or app editor. Now, this is the part I am most excited about in general when it comes to open source and automation, because I haven't found a single way that's reproducible across organizations, across services, that works as well as this one. And this is something I've built, so I know exactly how to do it. So I'm biased here, of course, but it's still an editor that I'm proud of having built, and it will just become more expensive as we see the need for it. And by that I mean things that are missing right now are like we don't have OAuth 2 authentication, and when we have that, all of a sudden we can use even more platforms, right? So the app editor is simply a way of the user interface, using the user interface to implement REST APIs. Which is at the core of this. So we'll get into that at the third part of this workshop. And I'll also probably show you some Python code and live coding when we get to that point. On the right-hand side, we have organizations. So this is kind of a new feature that's come along after after version 8. I'll show you parts of that in the roadmap later on. And it has a lot of the control that you want as an organization. You want to have users be able to see what they should see. You want to be able to control the authentication mechanisms in the platform. You want to have, it's where you can control the overarching aspect of the platform, in essence. And you can have like 1 or 2 admins, or you can have everyone being admin and all that stuff. Next up here, for feedback. So JSAC has their own feedback that they link to. I'm sorry I didn't add it in there. I should have done that. But all feedback I would really, really appreciate, like in general. We have our Slack channel that we're using right now on the JSAC2021 Slack, and we have a Discord channel, which is for Shuffle itself. At the bottom there is my email, and please feel free to email me anytime. I'll try to answer any questions you have. I've tried to do that since the whole project became open source, and I will try to do that over time as well. And the feedback can be related to this talk. It can be related to the platform itself. Because I'm 100% sure we will find bugs today. That's just a fact. This platform is not complete yet, so there will be things that we have to kind of work around for now until it's in a properly stable format. It is open source and mostly written by me only, and I'm looking for contributors. But because of that, I'm pretty sure we will find some things that we will write up as new issues on GitHub. And on that matter, we can also use GitHub. Please make new issues on the apps or for the workflows on the Shuffle GitHub itself. I also realized I should have added those URLs in here now. Next up, here's a little bit about me. So first of all, the introduction was really good, even though my last name is horrible to pronounce for everyone. I'm Fredrik Oedegaardstuen, and it's a very, very Norwegian name. I'm sorry if you have to kind of like deal with that name in any way later on, because it's hard for everyone. I live in Japan. I've lived in Japan now for a little more than 1 year. I came here in late 2019. At the time, I was working at a big financial technology company, fintech company in Norway. And I was building automation for them. So I've been building automation, security automation all along, and this was a natural progression from that. towards creating something for the community and by the community that can be used in different enterprises and not just very specialized software as it is right now. Before I worked in that last team, I've worked in development teams together with others to create general enterprise software. I've also worked in a SOC where I was the person to handle all the firefighting, which is where I learned that automation is the most important thing to me in general when it comes to security operations in general. Right now, what I'm working on is, in general, security automation. Sorry. So I do security automation, which is through Shuffle. I also have a couple of companies I work together with Shuffle to build out the infrastructure for Shuffle itself, because it needs to be implemented in many places. So I do security automation as well as just build the platform. I used to do more of it, but now I still do some digital forensics and incident response things. But these are really just one-time deals at this point, where someone wants to use some parts of my knowledge to implement it, to help them implement a better process for their SOC and stuff like that. And last up, I do startups. I love the startup life. That's kind of what I'm doing here. I've been in Tokyo without a real job for over a year, and it's been working out well. Now it's starting to work out to where I can work on Shuffle full-time, or partly full-time, more than I'm doing right now, because this is not a full-time job for me yet. And I really want to keep building it basically into something that's sustainable for me, and hopefully that can help other enterprises across the world long term. So on the right hand side here is an image of me from basically right before I came to Japan. Oh, I look so young, by the way. It's interesting. It's from Russia. So I went to a wedding in Russia, which was really amazing, and I like this location a lot. So that's me being happy 1.5 years ago. And on that note, I love to run and travel. So I've been traveling a lot for the last few years since I became good at security and got since it became possible, basically. And at the same time, I run a lot, especially when I travel. But sadly, for the last year, that's been impossible, as everyone knows. So I'm not going to get too much into that. So yeah, let's get into Shuffle and what it is, how it was started, the story of the whole thing in general. Because there are so many things I can't go into here, but I've written down like the main parts of my journey here, because I feel like the story behind Shuffle is kind of interesting as to where I come from and how it's been growing. So first of all, as I mentioned, like 2 years ago, I worked for a fintech company in Norway, and at the place I came in, and when I started working there, I came into a team of 6 or 7 people. They had an MSSP, they had a SIM, which was Splunk, and that's kind of it. That's all they had. There was nothing to work as a team, basically. So what they did was they worked with Excel and Outlook, basically. They worked with emails and they worked with Excel. So they put in critical incidents in the Excel sheet. Now, this works really well if you have like 1 incident per week. But as you all know, no one has that. We have so many more incidents, and there's a lot of firefighting going on. So just having an Excel sheet just didn't cut it, basically. We needed a way more efficient way of building it. So what I built when I came there, I started by setting up open source solutions like the Hive and Cortex and MISP, and started integrating those services with everything else. And this kind of got into this like big amalgamation of code I'd written, so that when I quit, they didn't know exactly how to continue building because they didn't have a developer anymore. And I built so many things there, including pipelines for IOCs to like block instantly in the firewalls. There were things like you have the EDRs, and if you have like a new file that's suspicious on hosts that Microsoft come with it like an advisory for or something, we could just search all over the enterprise for that really easily on the host itself. You didn't need to do stuff like use the EDR and hope the file still exists in the database. What you could do is run a sweep of every machine, and that's like 10,000 machines. And building the infrastructure for that was really, really fun. But at the same time, it doesn't work if you're going to like swap jobs, and you can't transfer any of it. Everything is too specific, basically. That's what I found. Plus, every implementation there took me probably 10 minutes, 10 minutes each. No, 10 minutes, what am I saying? 10 days at least to implement, because it's hard to make stuff that's stable in general. Like that's why Shuffle, I can't say Shuffle is 100% stable yet either. It's really good at this point, but it's not the best for everything yet, which we're hoping to get it to. And a really big issue from all of this is basically that there's now a lot of proprietary code in there, and the proprietary code itself are things that they can deal with if they take the time and sit down and try to understand it. But most people won't do that. They just want to keep building. That's a normal thing, right? And at the same time, most blue teams. So blue teams are really interesting to me just because they are, in general, really, really knowledgeable people for the security market or for security in general. But most people in those teams, even though they're the most technical people that knows the ins and outs of computers, they don't really know how to code. They don't know how to implement something from scratch, like to build something from scratch. When I just have an idea, I want to just build it. That's how I think. But most blue teamers, they want to do that, but they can't. And this is just the reality of it. And to be upfront about it as well, I believe most of the people at this conference are not those kinds of people. I believe you guys are ahead of those. But I want to build Shuffle towards being something that can work for everyone, not just for people that are really, really good already, but for people like so they can understand it. Not from the get-go. You have to understand a little bit. That's like you always need that when you get into information security in general. But what I'm getting to is these developers are unicorns in a way. If you guys are automating things and you're able to program for a few hours every day, like that's amazing. That's so much better than 90% of the organizations across the world that's doing anything, or maybe 99%. I don't have a proper figure for that. But it's so good if you can do any automation at all. Sorry. So about Shuffle. Shuffle is built very specifically towards accessibility. As I've mentioned many times, I really want to get to a point with Shuffle where almost anyone that gets into cybersecurity can pick it up and understand from the get-go what's going on. So it's going to be really complex, of course, but you can understand the basics. And if you can understand the basics, you can get into it really easily. So accessibility has from the start been a really extremely important aspect, actually. I just want everyone to understand a little bit more of automation. I wanted my team back then to be those people that could see what was happening behind the scenes, because we've all been there. If you've been scripting and something's happening behind the scenes and you've been working on it for days and days and no one even notices because it's just hidden away. And that's kind of why you do automation, right? You don't want to look at it again. But at the same time, you want your manager to recognize you for your job. You want everything like that to be able to get better at what you do, to get a pay bump maybe, depends on what you're going for there. And at the same time, having worked with standardization in general towards like, say for SIMs, where you have Splunk and QRadar as like super big ones, there are a lot more, of course. why don't you use things like Sigma to talk to them in general, so that in case you change the provider in the future, you always have the Sigma rules that you have, so that you can just change. And if you change organizations as well, you can also bring your rules with you. But at the same time, what's even better is if you create a standard query with Sigma, then it works everywhere, and you can share it with other enterprises. And a really hard thing to understand for most people in InfoSec, I'm sure you guys are aware, is the thing related to this is not really a battle against another organization. We're trying to stop evil in a way. And we should always be sharing. We should always help each other. Even though we're in a different enterprise, I truly believe that we should work together, as is what this conference is for, right? We should work together to make everything better and more understandable. So for the last part there, this is an interesting aspect with NSA walk-off. I'm not sure who's heard of it, but NSA walk-off was an experiment by the NSA to build an automation platform, and they built it over like 6 years or something, but they ended up discontinuing it last year. And it's the whole premise that Shuffle is based upon. So don't worry, all the code is rewritten, so there's no like hidden things in there from them. But they had some really good architecture and design things that I put into Shuffle, which I'll show you later, as well as they had the general premise for how this should work. They just didn't know how to build it, so you want to use it. A really big issue is, how can I make these people that are really loving the command line interface be able to use this user interface? How do you move those people over? And they were not able to do that at all. And they were not able to build like a scalable platform around it either. It was really tricky based on how they did it. But anyway, back in 2019, I wrote a blog post about NSA walk-off, which was called the same as this talk, actually. It was called Automation for Everyone, as you can see under there. But it was at the time for walk-off. Now it's just for Shuffle 1.5, 2 years later. And from that, it is what kind of like spurred the whole inspiration to build this platform, to build everything, to take an adventure, basically. It was so much fun to me to be able to dig into someone else's code and understand exactly how they thought when they were building it. And I built a prototype pretty fast, but it took a long time to build like something I wanted to use myself. But that's always been the goal. I'm aiming for myself, and then everyone else hopefully will like it as well. And then, of course, based on your feedback that you give me over time, I'll try to build it towards something better. And right now, we're getting new developers and contributors into the project. By the way, hi, Nino Seki. Nino. Thank you for helping me organize all of this. You're also a contributor to the project. Thank you for that. And there are so many other awesome people that have helped out, and there will be more coming on very soon. So about the project, here's kind of where we are right now. This is our roadmap back from. I could add like further up as like as well, like 0.6, 0.5, etc. But the key aspect right now is we are kind of in the middle of doing something related to files. And the really important thing here, you can see like the 0.8 is bolded. Everything we're doing right now is related to getting files to work properly. And the hard thing about that is to make it work everywhere. It's easy to just make a file system where you can send files around, but we needed to make it simple and easy to use. So I've been working together with two people especially. I should have their names in here. I'm sorry I don't. It's Dadocchio and Garanius. They're both from Italy, I believe. And they've been helping out building out this system for a long time. I'm really thankful to them for helping out with new features in general, because working on the bleeding edge of this can be frustrating, but we get to a good point at the end. We will soon be releasing 0.9, just because we are almost done with everything else when it comes to just functionality and scaling. So we will soon move to having the possibility of running parts of your workflow in AWS and Google Cloud Platform. And those are really interesting aspects because they grant you scale automatically. Like I don't need to build like a Kubernetes cluster to get everything working. We can use their serverless architecture. So what's also going to come at the time, which I believe is a really huge impact to this whole thing, is something I also built in the past, which was a search engine. So most enterprises don't have a search engine for their enterprise in general. And that's a really hard thing for me to see why not, in a way. Like, why don't you have that? But this can entail so many things, which is why I'm aiming for Shuffle to kind of like be a center point for the security organization. So everything kind of flows through Shuffle, and through that we can parse indicators, we can parse everything related to any like host name or whatever it is, and we can store them in Shuffle itself and make like a search engine around Shuffle. I built this as well in the previous place I worked, and it was the best help ever when you had an incident. It can be used for enrichment of data. It can be used for searching for people, like what organization is a person in. It's super important for you to know that in a lot of cases. Like, is this the CEO or is this someone in a development team? Like, that can be critical depending on the case that you have. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff coming. The vision for this whole thing is really expansive and super fun to build, to be honest. Like, this has been a journey of my life to build, and I'll keep trying to bring something good to it. But we will for sure have some use cases to share. I will share some today. We will have a lot of apps that are categorized, and we will have a proper tutorial. And by tutorial, I mean plug and play automation. You can click some buttons and all of a sudden you're in. I will show you the basics of that today, because there are a lot of things like that already. Okay, over to architecture. So this might not mean anything to you right now, but we can get back to it later. But this is architecture for Shuffle, and you can ignore the Shuffle Cloud thing for now. But the backend and the front end are like the primary aspects here, right? Those are used to move around and connect to the database and all that stuff. But the backend is what really controls the whole of Shuffle. So everything talks to the backend. On the bottom, there's like a stipple line, I believe it's called. Like, there's a line right here, which underneath has everything related to executions. And executions in Shuffle, everything above are APIs and like use cases for a person. Everything underneath are executions. And executions here means running Python code. That's it. Like, these are the things that make stuff happen in general. They're also based on both OpenAPI and Python code written by me and all our contributors. It's a complex system that I can get more into if we have time in the end, because this is it's complex. It's hard to build for scale, but it's also really efficient right now. So here's a typical use case for Shuffle. Almost everyone has a SIM. I would hope everyone has one somewhere to search for indicators in general, search and have alerting and everything. Just from the left-hand side, this is just a simple use case. You can do this with anything that you send from your SIM in general, but it's trying to basically talk about how a SOAR can do your job for you. So from the left-hand side, you have the use case library, which are alerts that get sent from the SIM. These alerts are then sent into the SOAR through some mechanism. It can be a webhook, it can be an API. There are a lot of ways to do it in general. The SOAR can do it all the way around and look for the alerts as well. Like, that's a typical thing to do. You can schedule those things and get them working. But the point is, once you have alerts, what do you do with them? It's a really tricky situation to solve for most people. And if you have a team and are not just working alone, it's really good to have somewhere to work on these things together. So where should this CM alerts go? And an example of that is, I don't know if you guys know this in general, but QRadar is like a big SIM in general. And I used to work on it. And we used to work together as a team inside QRadar. And they have something called offenses, which is the same as alerts. But what I found was that using QRadar as both an alerting system and a SIM did not work at all. It didn't feel good, like nothing about it felt good. So I just wanted to move out of that system in general and work somewhere else. So that's why I started building a lot of automation around that and moving data around. So that's why you want your SIM alerts to be sent out of the SIM so they can be handled properly and you don't have to enrich inside the SIM. Now there are probably use cases where this is plausible with the SIM itself, but I don't recommend it personally. So once it hits the SOR though, that's when it gets tricky, I'd say, because that's when we need to know as the platform Shuffle, right? Is we need to know what network is this in, not necessarily, but what network is it in? Who's the person behind it? What's the actions that we need to perform if it's malicious? What kind of action in general is really important to do here? And as you can see on the very right-hand side, it says types of automation. I hope you can see this. It says types of automation. And those are 4 different kinds. I'm sure there's a lot more that we can make up. But underneath each of those are so many different automations that can be run. Like for a forensic automation, say there's a machine that's compromised and you can do like, you can isolate the host somehow, like take it off the network, put it in its own VLAN. And after the fact, you dump the memory through the SOR, and you start an automated analysis. That's another tool that actually the Garan use guy I mentioned earlier made, like automated malware or memory analysis, right? Using volatility and everything on top. In the bottom right are the exact things that are being done. So these are the actions that you perform, right? So these are the things that you always, if you have your own enterprise, you need to build these yourself. It takes a lot of time to build the APIs for everything. And especially if you can't share that script after the fact, right? Like if it's done by you as a script, then it's probably done by thousands of other people's, thousands of security professionals doing this exact same thing. So why aren't we standardizing this? That's my question that it comes back to. Why is the blue team community like so? Why are we building ourselves? Now, there are edge cases to everything, and you guys are some of the best people in the world at sharing that I've been following over the years before coming to Japan as well, and using information from in our security infrastructure. But at the same time, there's no one's tackling the easy bits. And the easy things are, how do you block an IP in the firewalls? How do you block an IP in the web application firewall? How do you block a user? How do you disable the VPN for this one? Like it says there. How do you blacklist a hash? Like these are the simple things that aren't being done right. They're not being done, and it takes a lot of time to get there. I'm just going to check the Slack. Maybe someone wrote something. Okay. So next up, now we're going to get into Shuffle a little bit. So what I have for myself, I'm not sure if you guys have it open, but I have a Shuffle environment available in the background that I'll swap to sometimes, so we can do some real things and not just go straight into looking at these training things. There's a typo. I can't read that Japanese. It takes me too long. I'm sorry. And so yeah, to get started with the whole project. first we need to kind of log in, and we get introduced with this screen. I'll do this in real time later on as well. First, I'm just going to show you the screens and make you understand a little bit more of what's going on. So there's a login screen. It's the typical thing, and you get represented with this screen, which kind of has a lot of functionality. Straight from the get-go, you have like a settings button for your user. You have a workflows button to check your workflows. There are no workflows from the start, but you can import them and use them. I'll show you more of that later. You can see at the top, there are the apps, and there are the documentation things that you can search for. And in the middle is kind of like a graphic just to tell you, hey, welcome. This is what the platform is for. Please come inside and feel welcome and try to build some stuff. So what we're not doing yet is telling you how to use it. And that's like the really hard thing that we're going for this year. It's going to be really important. So from the left to the right, workflows, something you build, and apps are something you use to build those workflows. Documentation is documentation. Hope you know that. Then we have the admin view, which is for organizations. And next up, we have settings, which is just for your user. And on the right-hand side, we have log out. And those are, it's simple enough. Those, except for the left two ones, they should be pretty self-explanatory. So first up, here are workflows. Again, I will show you more of this later in the user interface itself when I click around and demo part of it. But I just want to go through it really quickly so we don't forget something. So from the left-hand side, this is kind of like tricky to look at. Left-hand side are the workflows. They can be edited. You can set the name. You can set the description for them. You can set some tags. As you can see, like the top one says hook test, and that one has the tag of hook. And that's just so you can use the tagging for later if you want to share the workflow. We are making a way for us to share and understand them by other people as well, so that you can share directly from Shuffle, basically, to other people. In the middle, there's the execution hook test. That's the title on the top. Those are the actual executions. And an execution in Shuffle means something that's been ran. So it's ran your Python code in the background, essentially. And within those, again, is the actual data. Like, what are the results of each part of it? So you'll understand that a bit more later. There are more buttons there as well. We'll get into it. Next up, here are the apps. So this is an app view, basically, for you to be able to search and create apps and to find what you're looking for. So right now, there's something like 67 that have been made by Shuffle. It's not 49 as it says here anymore. That's like 2 months ago. But it's we are at some point nearing 70. And we will keep building, of course. And this will just, as we get users and use cases, this will grow exponentially. And that's what we're hoping for, as long as we can provide the documentation and training to be able to do that in a good way. There's a lot of buttons here as well. Most of them, I think, are self-explanatory. I'll get into a little bit more of them later on, especially the ones related to app creation, because they are the most tricky ones. And on the right-hand side, you can kind of click through each app and find what their actions are. Then there's the documentation. So documentation in Shuffle is created on GitHub. So we have all our documentation for Shuffle on GitHub itself. And this can be helped by you guys. Like, if you can help us build out the documentation, super appreciative, because it takes so much time to keep it up to date to what we're doing. And that's kind of also why I haven't done as much as I should have done towards that. And now what we got really recently from another new contributor is app creation documentation, which has been a long time coming. But all this is to say, this is open source. You can find everything on GitHub under Shuffle Docs, I believe. I'll share resources later on. And each of these are built to help you understand how to do something specific with Shuffle. So now let's get into the organizations. So organizations from Shuffle is like the latest addition to Shuffle, but I still want to talk about it. because I believe it's really important. So most people working in security are, I don't want to say most, a lot of people working in security automation or security in general are working in like service providers. And I really want to help service providers and organizations or enterprises directly, right? That are not service providers of security services. But I see a really, really big need for MSSPs, especially, to have standardized ways of doing things with old customers and new customers, and making that synchronous so that this all works at the same time. And by building out organizations and having organizations in the same version of Shuffle, where like you can set one organization over here, and then you set another one here, and then you can have an organization controlling these two on top. Where like, say you want to change the workflow for the top one, it will change the workflow for the other organizations as well. So that if you have 100 customers, you can change one thing and it spreads across all of them, instead of having to log into each individual enterprise and like rewrite the script or whatever you do right now. It's an efficiency method that really makes it better, like a lot better for MSSPs in general, and I believe it also helps normal use for enterprises as well, because you can do the same with departments. Say, instead of calling them organizations, call them departments, and then you can do the same thing where a department runs this, another runs this, and you want to report every month from the same location. Okay, run this workflow. Yeah, we'll get back to that later as well. There are so many things to get through. So here are the organizations, like the first overview that you see for organizations in general. And on the top, you can see a lot of buttons related to, like, you have some users, you have authentication, you have environments, you have schedules, you have files as the last addition up there. And all of these are basically so all resources in Shuffle are controlled on an organization level. So if you create a workflow, it will first be your workflow as a person. If you're a user, it's your workflow. And then you can also make it so that the whole organization can see it. But you can not share it outside of that if you don't like share it outside the platform itself and someone re-imports it. So everything is organization related and has an organization related to it. Every user, every authentication mechanism, every environment, every schedule, every file, everything is organization based. So you can't go get something that you shouldn't get, essentially. Now, what we're going to do here is go through each and every part of this, kind of slowly, because it's important to understand aspects to this, and I'll try to explain the best I can. Hopefully you have some questions for some parts of this as well, and I'll try my best to answer. So from the top here, we have the name and the description. Those are basic, kind of. They are built to just be able to. So if you've used malware information sharing platform like MISP before, they've done this really well, where you kind of like define your enterprise over here and someone else defines here, and then you can synchronize later. This is kind of something that we want to do with Shuffle as well, because we believe in sharing resources, and if someone else has like something you can do in their environment that's okay, then why not allow it? Like, it's not a focus, of course, but we believe it's good. There's also like a tiny arrow underneath the description, which allows you to define the default places to find apps and workflows, like to download them remotely. And underneath here is something called cloud synchronization. So cloud synchronization is not important right now. This is related to with Shuffle. I didn't want to build in functionality that is proprietary. I don't want to have, or the other way around, I don't want to not build proprietary software in a way. Like, so some functionality is just better in the cloud. in general. Like it's better, it's easier to do because someone else handles the servers of it, and it's public. So when something is public, you have access to it from anywhere. Like I can get to it from my phone, right? Instead of having to open proxies and have all that stuff taken care of for the server itself. So what's been done here is I made some functionality that's usable from the cloud, so you can have a public URL for a webhook instead of a local one. And that makes it way simpler for cloud services. What if you have a cloud service that you want to connect to Shuffle? Okay, use the cloud version of Shuffle to connect to your local instance. So to be clear, this is still the local instance of Shuffle, but you get some parts of the cloud version, which opens up possibilities a lot. It also gives you the possibility of sending SMS and sending mail and stuff like that without having to put much effort into it. There's also more to it, like the user interface, user input trigger on the right-hand side, which is really useful. I'll talk about it later. It's based on the users having to click something for something to continue. So next up, we have user management. This user management view is basically just so that you can control the roles of every user. You can control if they're active, you can disable a user, you can get a new API key, etc. You can add a new user to your organization. Everyone are by default created as a user role. Later on, we'll make this more granular so you have more access to control it. But right now, point is, we want to allow you to collaborate. App authentication. So this has been updated quite a bit since this picture. I'll show you a lot more of that later. But app authentication is a really, really important aspect to Shuffle and making it feel good, because it's the thing that allows you to make a standard way of communicating with some software. So from the top here, we have IBM QRadar, we have Outlook Web Application, we have VirusTotal, and we have the Hive. So I'm not sure if you know about those four, but they require some fields to be defined so that you can communicate with them, like communicate with the platforms themselves. And you can see the fields on the right-hand side. Like for the Hive, it's an API key and a URL. For VirusTotal, it's an API key. And for Outlook Web Application, which is also hotmail.com and outlook.com, actually, it's username, password, server, etc. You need all that stuff to be able to build it out. And these, the really cool thing about this, I feel like, is that you can easily make a new workflow and not have to specify a lot. Like this makes for standardization in a lot of cases. And it's easy to build from a developer side as well. If you define it in the app creator, you get it straight into the app. And once it's been made one time, you have it forever. You can also make more authentications, or all authentications have to be made in Shuffle itself, like in the workflows though. I'll show you more later. We have 4 hours here, so there's a lot to get through. You can also now edit this. You can edit the fields. You can set like a new username, new password, new server, new build, etc. for the Outlook Web Application, the middle one. You can set a new API key for VirusTotal and have it spread around all workflows in a whiff. Like if you change, you don't want to go into every workflow and change everything. So that's what this is really good for, basically. Next up, here are environments. This is a bit more tricky to understand. This is maybe the trickiest part of this whole thing because it's related to executions. It's about how do we run our data? Like where physically can it run? So Shuffle uses something called Orberus environments. If you look at the top there, decides what Orberus environment to execute an action in a workflow in. What that means in practice is if you have a server park in Tokyo and you have a server park in Osaka, there's probably not a way for you to communicate with both of those at the same time and make them talk to Shuffle in an easy way. But what there is a way to have an agent in both of those locations and have them reach out themselves. So these are essentially defining what are the agents for Shuffle. Like where are the agents installed for Shuffle. So you have Osaka here, you have Tokyo here, and Shuffle in the middle, and both of them talk to Shuffle individually. And environments are basically, what if I want to run the Hive in Osaka, and I want to run like MISP in Tokyo, or it's hard to come up with platforms like this right now. Or what if one of them is secluded so you can't connect to the internet from it? Then it's easy to connect out and have a proxy back for these kinds of things and making them work long term. Again, it's another thing I can show you more of later. Schedules. So schedules are a way to execute a workflow. It's a trigger. It's called a trigger, which is something that runs a workflow in general. You can define it to start on a specific node in a workflow, and it can run on a second interval. In the cloud, it can also run on a cron schedule, and we'll probably get cron jobs set up for the on-premise later too. So this can be a way of, say you want to run a search in Splunk every day and find some data that to validate if you've hit these IOCs. Okay, use a schedule. It's stuff like that. It will run every like 15 seconds, every 20 seconds, every 2 days, like whatever you decide. And they can be stopped easily. So you can also run it every second if you want to. Not that that's good, but you can. Last but not least, the thing we're going to go through here is files. And files are the latest addition. They're really important, right? In general, we get a lot of attachments. People send reports. We get all kinds of stuff sent to us as security professionals that people are like, is this malicious? Is this malicious? Is this malicious? And they can be emails, and you can go to a website and all of a sudden something is downloaded. It can be downloaded in the background. You can have like file integrity monitoring for this stuff, and all these files have to go through somewhere to verify if they're okay. And I'm not saying Shuffle is the best for this yet, but Shuffle is an alternative at this point. So one of the workflows we'll be creating today will be, I'll basically take ICAR or some MD5s and put them in a file and send them through Shuffle and upload them to VirusTotal. Just as a simple example, like make a file and send it through Shuffle, so that you can see like what actually happens there. And to recap all of this, these are kind of like the things we'll be going through in general in the workshop. We have apps, we have like the app creation, apps. So this is a good slide to go back to later, because it shows you kind of like the most important parts of every part of Shuffle, like every major part, and like how authentication mechanisms work, how you have organizations, how you control authentication, how you control schedules, how you control files, etc., etc. And the same for app creation. So now we have 5 minutes left. So I'm just going to spend the 5 minutes instead of next slide should be workflows. Yeah, instead of getting into workflows right now and talking about this too much, what I'll do is I'll open my browser right here. I hope you can still see this, and I have Shuffle available here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to recap basically what we did with organization right now. So if I just make a new user account here now, I have like a LastPass thing over here to help fill it out. So I'm just going to log in with this, submit, it registers, and you have a user. So that's something you have to do every time when you're a first-time user. If you're the first one to set it up, you have to create the first admin account. And that's the organization we create for you as well. It maps to that one. So here, as you can see, this is the same view as we had earlier. We have a new workflow, we have this one for importing, and we have downloading workflows remotely. Up here is what we just went into. As you can see, nothing is synchronizing here. We don't have a proper name for it. It's just default right now. You can also, one thing I didn't mention, you can also change the image actually to have something more specific to you guys. For users as well, you can create the users, as I said, you can edit the user, add a new password, all that stuff. Authentication, by default, no authentication because you haven't defined anything. Again, this is a new environment. It's not been set up yet. It's not finished at all. And here we have our environments. So by default, there's one environment, it's Shuffle, and it's being used in the background from the get-go. Next up, we have the schedules. Sorry. And they don't exist either before you make them. We'll get back to this when we have made some of it. And same for files. So basically everything is empty when you first start. But it's really easy to get to fill them up a little bit, because what we can do, I will get back to this in the training material as well, but I will just make a simple workflow now and run it for you so you can like see what's happening here. Testing, let's call it JSAC test, just so we have something to run. Now I'm crossing my fingers we don't have demo issues, which always happens. And when you come into this view, you get like a start node which can run something. So what I'm going to do now, just to fill up a little bit in the organization, is I'm going to create a new trigger right here. This is the scheduler, as you saw earlier. And I will start this one now because we're going to have a break for an hour, and I'm going to run it every 2 minutes for the next hour, just so you can see it and how the data is being used in this one. So right now, I'll explain this more in detail later. So I'm just going to say, hey, JSAC in here. And for this one, I'll say it's going to repeat the same as the scheduler. And now just to test this, I will run this. I will start this one right now. So I don't remember exactly if it starts instantly or if it starts in 120 seconds. But what we can do to kind of like surpass that is we can take this one, this data, and we can put it here, and we can run it manually as well. So now I'm just going to run it manually. Let's see if it works at all. Otherwise, I have something I need to fix. Yeah, there we go. So within basically 2 seconds, it ran the whole thing, and it validated. So from there, we have a lot of executions we can look at and a lot of stuff like that. So I just wanted to quickly get into this and show you a workflow before you go to lunch. I think we'll be taking a break in a second. So I'm just going to get into the admin view again. And here you can now see a schedule, as we saw earlier. So all of this stuff is automatically filled straight into your organization. When you do something over here, it's most likely being tracked over here, basically, so that as an admin, you can always stay on top of things. If there are issues related to scaling, if there are issues related to authentication, as an organization admin, you should always be able to go in there. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention about authentication, actually, that's really important, is so first of all, right now, it's not being encrypted, by the way. Like, just keep that in mind. Don't put super sensitive stuff in there. Put okay stuff in there, but don't put the worst sensitive stuff. API keys and stuff like that is kind of okay, but we haven't built out the encryption mechanism. Keep that in mind. Second of all, no one can access the data if they don't have access to the database. So the data from the authentication is only in the database, and it's being sent to the apps directly. So you can't, as a user, see the authentication being used. You can't edit. Like, so when there's an edit button, you can't actually edit based on what was there before. You have to remake the whole thing. And that's always how we will do things, because destructive actions are way more efficient at keeping security in general. So that's just to like show you super basics of organizations. We've gone through the basics of this. Oh yeah, here's the GitHub parts I mentioned. You can kind of do like, so let's do some custom repo / shuffle apps. Now I'm not sure who this custom user will be, but you can just define the user and the branch here. You can save. So this is where it should by default download apps from now. These are like configuration items. So we can go into the apps, and apparently not. Okay, that's our first bug. Good to know, good to know. Because it's saved here, but it's not. Okay, that's our first bug for today. That's good, right when we have a break. Okay, thank you everyone for coming in here. And I think we'll be taking a break for an hour. I'll see you guys back here at 1:30, and please ask any questions during lunch, or say what didn't work and what worked, and I'll try to improve it. We'll get way more technical from now on. Fine, and all of a sudden you need to like test it because it can break. To the right of the play button, we have our execution argument. The execution argument is something we can give to the workflow to run. So it can be used inside of the apps. And this is typically something like you can parse in a full PDF in there. You can copy paste it, and then your workflow can handle that after the fact, like indicators from the PDF. Or whatever report you get. Like you can get an email, you can dump all the indicators from that email, and from there you have a full set of features to be able to handle random data. So this field is also the main reason actually that I started building Shuffle, because Walkoff did not have this feature. They did not have it built for usability like this. They wanted to focus on only the automation aspects to it, which are like having apps do everything. But I truly believe that the user interface and the execution argument in this case, which just means some data, you just give it some data. I truly believe that that's the thing that makes it work properly. Like it's used for every trigger. A trigger also triggers an execution argument, etc. To the right of the execution argument is a big save button. It's in orange right now, which means you should save before executing. This is an important button just because we are not auto-saving anything right now, but we are checking if we should be saving. So this button, if it's orange, it's basically saying, hey, you need to remember to save before you do stuff. And if it's not orange, that's this button, by the way. If it's not orange, it means you have some unsaved data to handle before you execute. And if you don't save, it will run with your last configuration because it doesn't know what the new one is. To the right of it is a button that helps the workflow. I'll show how that works later. It basically makes it show everything. So if you have thousands of in Shuffle, that button will make you show all the thousands of nodes instead of just like showing one or two or something. Next to it is a delete button. So this is essentially just a way to delete a node or an action or a trigger inside of Shuffle. You select it, you click the delete, it's gone. This will be made better later on, but this is like the primary way of handling deletes right now. You can also click the delete button up until like the latest version of Shuffle, where we found a bug with it. Right of that is something that's really important as well, which is how we learn about executions. So when something runs, you want to see the result, and that's where you can see the results for everything in the past. So if you remember, before lunch, I started a workflow which has a schedule every 120 seconds. So hopefully by now it should have run 90 minutes worth. So that's 47 times or so. So we should have 47 executions we can look at inside that button. And to the right of that, I think is, so these buttons way on the right, like the running person and the settings button, I think are underutilized because I put a lot of extraordinarily powerful features in there that can do things for you. And for the right one, the settings button, that's an overall settings button for the whole workflow. So what that means is it has, by example, one button which is if one node fails in the whole workflow, it should just exit. It should quit itself. But you can turn that on and off so that you can decide if it should quit if something fails or not. Things like that. That's what it's for. It's for controlling the entire workflow itself. Yeah, we'll get more into all of those. So now I've been talking about executions and
workflows and manual executions and execution arguments and all that stuff now all along. And now we're going to get into actually how this works a little bit better. Again, I'll go through this in the user interface as well, just to make sure it's understandable. Sorry about that. Here is the basic view for clicking the testing node, so you can decide a lot of stuff from this. So down in the bottom left, this is kind of like how you can connect things. You can create like a schedule, which is a trigger. If you see like this octagon, it's a trigger, which means it's something that starts the workflow. And if you see like a circle, it's the start node, and a square is any subsequent node, not the start nodes. And for manual actions in this case, you have to use this field, like down here is the execution argument. You can put anything in it. And if you then put like exec up here, which is the execution argument, there's a lot of names for it, and you have the autocomplete right here as well. If you put exec right here, it will take this data and put it in this field when it runs. And this is how all of Shuffle kind of works. I'm just trying to explain this from the ground up now, so that you have a really good grasp of how everything works before we start doing the complicated stuff. It's not necessarily important to understand all of this short term, but long term, I believe it is, if you're going to help create something with Shuffle. So there are different triggers you can use. There's mainly the schedule and the webhook, and I'll get more into those when we get to the trigger parts. But here as well. So what's happening here is essentially that this part right here is becoming a variable. And if you have some programming experience, you know that a variable is something where you store some data so it can be reused other places. And in this position, it's being stored. It's being stored as exec. So that's what this one is doing on the right side under call. It's grabbing the execution argument data and putting it in the field itself. So this is a variable, and there are multiple kinds of variables. You can create something called workflow variables. There are execution variables. There are node variables, like all these kinds that are done. These happen in the background. You don't need to think about what they are, but we'll get into it. So now that we've looked at super basics of execution, here are basically the simple facts about apps. They are simple to understand from the get-go if you're a user. They are draggable, so you can take it from the side, kind of like plop it inside. Again, I can show you more of that, or I will. And underneath every app, there's a lot of actions, and an action is something that actually happens. So the app is kind of like, this is where you have the logo, you have the name, you have the version, you have the description, but then it describes an action. And the actions are the things that do something for you. And an action can be like, say for a ticketing system, like say the Hive, or even say your email. An action could be get emails, and another action could be mark email as read. And that means the first one just gets emails. That's one action. And the other one is using those tickets or emails that you got and marking them as read, so they've been handled, to make sure that they are handled. Each of them contain, again, arguments. This is when it gets like a little bit complex, but not really. If you just use Shuffle, it's not that complex to understand. And we aim to make it easier and easier over time, of course. But right now, you have an app with actions, again, with arguments and authentication. So arguments is the data. So if you go back here, back to the previous one, you can see from the top here that on the very top is configuring the app itself. Underneath is choosing an action in the red box, and underneath that are all the arguments for that action. So an app has an action which has an argument. And then it's authentication. We'll get more into authentication as well, especially for the developer parts, which is the last session we'll do today, basically to create stuff for you guys for whatever it is that you want to see. It could be like Python, it could be in the UI, whatever, we'll do it. So now we have just basically explained some normal parts of apps and how they can be used. Then there are variables, and these are all kinds of variables. I mentioned them earlier. You can use the execution argument, which is like the exec. I think we go a little bit, we go more into this as well. We go more into the execution arguments. We go more into the triggers and how they are used and how you can pass this data around. So on the bottom for this view, you can also see that there are like the variables, apps, triggers, and variables, which is kind of like you can choose between them, and you can create new variables in those, which can be used, which previously was used for authentication, but we built an authentication system, which is way better. But it can be used to save stuff like, say you have a firewall rule and you want to change it, put the ID for the firewall rule in there, so it can be reused everywhere. As for actions, so actions are, as previously mentioned, a way to define how an app is doing something. So an app in a single like circle or square can only have one action. And then if you want to do more, you need to make another one and another one and connect them together. So from the top here, we have you can decide a name for the whole for the app, and you can have authentication, which are predefined fields for the app and the action. Some actions can have authentication, even if it's the same app. You can kind of like decide. And underneath that, I previously mentioned environments, which we'll get into as well. But it's the main point here is you can run one action in one location and another action in another location and make them work at the same time. Last but not least, we have the parameters, which are the same as arguments. These are multiple names. We haven't really decided what to go with yet, so it's hard to keep this straight. But they are arguments. Some of them are required, some of them are optional, and some of them are authentication. And authentication is required, but they can also be used as normal fields. We'll see that too. And now, something we haven't talked about at all are conditions. I think they are also underutilized, mainly because they're a little bit confusing, and I agree with they're confusing, but we'll try to find a way to deal with that over time too. But in this case, we basically have a condition which connects two apps. So we are using the testing app here. And the reason we're using the testing app throughout this is because we can control it entirely. It's not like we're asking for some data from some external service like VirusTotal or PassiveTotal or something. Conditions are if statements. And if you add one condition and another one underneath, they have to both match for it to work. You can type whatever you want in them. And they can use data from all variables, as we have explained earlier. So here you can see on the left side, on the bottom, we have just an open condition template where you can put in your data. You can say like, this has to equal this. This has to not equal this, right? This has to contain this one. Stuff like that. It's a normal if statement checker. And on the right side, we have the opposite. It's basically, so in general terms, true would equal false in every case. But when we do the opposite, this one will become true. So this is when you learn about like, there's some Boolean algebra behind this, like true is false, not true is false, stuff like that. These are things that makes it possible to control the whole workflow itself. And these are powerful. They go really fast as well. They are checked every time you have them between. And the location they're checked, just for the technicality, is so in this case, we have the start node up here, and we have the testing one down here. So this condition is checked in the testing one app, so that it's verifying whether it should run itself. And that's because it's easier to do it that way than to handle everything in the back end. So the app itself is kind of controlling it, and later on we might change it. But we will keep this system for conditions for as long as we can, just because there's no reason not to. But we will add another node for conditions later too. Last but not least, we will get into loops later. So as a programmer, you use loops all the time. You get like a list of something, like a list of emails. You get 10 emails into your mailbox and you want to handle them. So loops is Shuffle's way of handling all those emails instead of just one at a time. So one at a time is possible as well, and I'll show you how. But one important aspect, which is why I added it here, is that you cannot use loops inside of conditions like this ones. So don't try to use a loop in here. You can use like a single item from a loop, but you cannot use the loop itself. So there's another way to do those. Here's a real application of conditions. So up here, we can see that we have true equals false, which is false, and but we made this opposite, right? Yeah, we made it opposite right here. This is not true equals false, which is true. So it jumps to the next one, which is data matches regex for a word. And in this case, I was wrong, actually, it's not this one. All it's doing right here is it's verifying true equals false. And if true equals false, it will continue. So as this one is used and handled, we can see it during an execution like this. So the first one is running, start node is running. And then the next one, testing one, is sending true equals false. And it's telling us true equals false is a failed condition. So this is how we can, how we stop our workflow in essence. If you don't want to go down this path, but you just want to go this path, you use conditions and you can do it like. So for VirusTotal, typical use case, you can have something like if there's more than 10 findings or 10 antivirus vendors that says that this is a malware thing, then you continue. But if it's less, then you don't, stuff like that. Okay, so now we have how variables actually work. And these are specific to Shuffle in a way. We use something called JSON-LD, I believe, which is used for like how this works. Shuffle is built on handling REST HTTP APIs. So if you don't know what that means, it means we have built the whole of Shuffle upon a specific structure that that handles programmatic data well. So like computerized data in an easy way. And we have made easy ways of working with this data, so you don't actually need to understand the data and how to use it You just need to learn what the buttons in Shuffle itself does. And here we can see all the variables mentioned earlier. From the top, we have triggers. You can use any trigger data sent from like a trigger, like a webhook or a schedule, using exec. There's also a couple of other names, but those are not important. It's the same as the execution argument. So they are all triggers are using this field called execution arguments. And next up, we have the apps. All the apps. All you have to do to use data from them is you add like a $sign, which says, hey, use this one. And after the $sign, you type in the name. And the same goes for variables. If you have the variable, you type the variable's name, it's going to be put into the location you put it. Last but not least, how this all works and how it's being made good is by auto completion. And I've talked about this for a long time through the project, but it's really hard to explain it properly. But the point is, how can we, in a really easy fashion, let you understand how to use Shuffle, essentially? Why don't you need to understand JSON to use it? So all we're saying is, if you want to use Shuffle, just get this data from this location instead of saying you need to type this thing, because it's easier to click 2 times than to type something that's hard to remember, like exec. Like that's a weird name to remember. So we have created this button. So on the right-hand side, we see the execution argument is pointing to this button inside the field. This is in all fields in Shuffle, by the way. Like, so if you're in a workflow and you click this button, you should see all the data that this node has access to. And if you have a variable, it shows variables. If you have a trigger, it shows the execution argument. It shows it anyway, actually. And if you have previous apps, like if there's 100 apps that goes before the one you have right now, then you can choose any one of them, or you can choose all of them if you want to. You can put anything you want in there, and Shuffle will handle the rest as long as you just like send the right data. So now we're going to start talking a little bit about JSON and how it works. Now, I will show you this specific use case later on as well, straight in Shuffle, so we can click through it, because it's an important thing to kind of get. And from the top, all of this is JSON. We are trying to use everything as JSON. We will try to parse JSON. If there's XML, we can handle that too, but we prefer JSON every time over both the YAML and XML and other structures that I've found. So now the question is basically, how can we, based on this data we see here, get Fredrik out of it, which is like the name we can see here, name : Fredrik, and how can we get Shuffle, which is like the product and the name Shuffle. So execution argument is this data. How do we get Fredrik and Shuffle from it? And this is the essence of how to use Shuffle in general. Like, how do you take data from this location, put it in this location? And the answer comes right here. So we have exec equals equals this long JSON string, and underneath it you can see to get Fredrik, all you do is $, which is to get the variable we want, and then we do the name. So in this case, it's exec, and then if you want the name, click .name. That's it. That's kind of how this all works. That's how to handle Shuffle JSON data. It's the same that happens for the next one too. For Shuffle, you get it by writing exec dot product name dot name, because it says here the first one is exec on the left hand side, and then it's inside like curly parentheses inside product. So it's exec dot product to get inside here, and then it's dot name, and that's how you deal with it. But the natural next question from this is, what if there are loops? So loops and for loops, while loops, etc., they are really, really useful to a programmer, and you really want them to work all the time, and you want them to be fast, etc. So Shuffle is actually built around a system where for loops run as fast as Python can run them. Instead of running the same block many hundred times to go through a list, we are running one block 100 times. So instead of like parsing all the JSON data and stuff like that 100 times, that's done once, and then it creates, it runs everything one time inside the same one, and you get all the results at the same time. So this can be tricky, but it can also be really powerful, because you can, I will show you parts of that later, where we send it to another place to handle just one result at the same time. And in this case, right here, we are going to handle some hashes. So this is a typical use case, like, not that this is the most advanced thing in the world, but I don't want it to be either. I want this to be a showcase. And these are hashes. I believe they are for Emotet, both of them, but I don't remember exactly. But I feel like Emotet is a good meme. I saw some memes in the Slack earlier about them as well. And Emotet has been going on for a long time, so it's relevant. But these are two hashes that we'll try to use. So now the question is, how do we get the hashes from this, right? So we have, if we set that the hashes is the execution argument, how do we get the hashes, each one of them one at a time? So there are 2 ways of doing it. If you want, there's a difference between sending all the hashes at once and sending them one at a time. So you can send this whole JSON or just this whole list, or you can send one part of the list at a time. And I'll show you how. So here, I mentioned before the workshop. Oh, by the way, so we will be extending the workshop for 15 minutes before we take a break, just because of the technical issues. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so we'll take the break at 2:45, and keep going from there. So yeah, it was supposed to be in like 2-3 minutes. And for here are the loops basically. Like, how do we handle loops in Shuffle? So we have 3 hashes in this one. Like the last one had 2, this one has 3, but it doesn't really matter, because how you handle loops one at a time is you add a hash in the end. Like it's called, I believe it's called an octothorpe in like bad or good English, which is a horrible word, a hashtag basically. So to go through a list, use a hashtag. So here we send exec, which is the execution argument, which is the same as back here, exec equals, and then here we have our loops with the hashes. So you do exec dot hashes, which gets this hash part, and then you do each item. So if you want to send all of them at once to VirusTotal, don't add the hash in the end. But if you add the hash in the end, it will go through them one at a time. That's how it works. So VirusTotal doesn't want a bunch of hashes, it wants one hash. In some cases, you could probably bulk search, but in this case, we don't. So in VirusTotal, in Shuffle, we've built an action called get hash or get hash value. We can call it something else. Get MD5, get, I don't know, probably a lot of good names for that. But in this case, you can see on the right side, we have the VirusTotal search app. It uses the authentication for VirusTotal API. It uses some get action, or the action it has is get hash to get a hash, and then it goes through each hash one at a time. So this is actually the hardest thing to deal with for new people, I think. This is what's going to be tricky for people to understand and how to use. But I'll show you how to simplify it later as well, because there are ways to simplify this a lot. Okay, loops, we'll get back to them and do them properly in the browser real time. I'll sit down and do them, click through them and make them work, and show you how the auto completion works for them and how we can do it together and get better at it. But right now, let's move on to the triggers. Here are the 4 triggers that we have for Shuffle right now. So the newest addition to this is the Shuffle workflow. I believe if you haven't updated and followed the beta for Shuffle for the last like month, you probably haven't seen this one, but it's one of the things that makes it easier to use Shuffle in general, because you can split things. So what it essentially does is it takes your user, and from your user, it takes your API key and puts it into it, and it allows you to run another workflow with your data. So say you have a list with all of these hashes, and you don't want to send them in like this because this is confusing to a user. But this is really good for a computer, but it's really confusing to a user. So it's about how you handle this. So you can send one hash to a new workflow at a time instead, and the same goes for the webhooks and the user input and the schedule. So from the top, we have the webhook. The webhook triggers. Let's see, how do I explain this? So if you're familiar with HTTP or computers in general, right, they use a lot of hooks, and hooks are essentially something happens here, which makes something happen over here. So it's a hook is this thing over here waiting for something. So this thing over here, say like a schedule is made on a Windows machine, it will send a hook to the scheduler, to the kernel. Not exactly sure how it works. Bad example from my side, but it's sending a hook so that you can use the data from the schedule to build it up in real time instead of having to wait for something. And you can also hook into this API as a user, but in this case, we have something called an HTTP hook in general. That means you over there with this service can send some data to me over here who has our webhook ready. And the webhook is like you can turn it on and off, and it's an extremely good way of sending data between systems. So say you have your SIM, you want to send an alert anywhere, it's usually going to be a webhook or like a custom API, but the webhook is really good for it. And for the and these, they take JSON as well. They can handle all the same data that you have in general. They can handle really large amounts of data actually. Next up, I mentioned shuffle workflow. It executes a sub workflow that you decide. So instead of running one workflow to handle one thing, you can standardize and make one workflow to handle malware, one workflow to handle endpoint detection, and like you call on them when you need them. Before the user input, let's do the schedule. So the schedule is what I mentioned earlier, something that can run on a schedule every so and so seconds, every so and so minutes, hours, days, whatever. It's up to you. It makes the workflow run when you want it, even though you go to bed at night. And the user input is the last one, which is kind of a tricky thing to deal with, but it's also a really interesting thing because what it can do is it can send you an SMS, by example, saying that, hey, we noticed this thing. Do you want to continue running? And you just click a button, and then the automation will run by itself. And this is something that almost no one has in the security industry in general. And it's something that in most cases is required from, how do I say this? So if you have a really critical asset in your network and you don't want to run automated like response on that machine because it's running like your main service for your company or something, then you don't want to just like run some malware analysis on it because you can slow it down. There's a lot of stuff that can happen. Basically, there's a lot of critical assets. You don't want to just like let it run some automation. So this is the way we've built, where Shuffle sends you a notification basically, which says, hey, do you want to continue running this workflow? Because this happened. Do you believe we should continue? And it's been working really well for the people that have been using it. It also requires an integration with Shuffle Cloud so that it can handle the email sending and all that stuff. Oh, by the way, on that note, if you want access to stuff like this, like the sending emails to executions in the cloud, hybrid stuff, talk to me, send me an email and I'll give you access so you can try it out and use it going forward, because we need no more beta users there as well. And I'll let you keep access because it's early adoption basically. So sub workflows, this is the one I mentioned earlier. Here we have an example of this where we take the virus total search we ran earlier and we send it to a workflow to analyze the results. And this can be done because what if you want to have like a really normal way of analyzing hashes that's done the same way every time? Okay, run another workflow, send the data somewhere else to handle it. Now, this may seem silly for this example, but if you have a really complex workflow, and you just want to add something to it, then this is the best way to do it, where instead of complicating the whole workflow with like 50 nodes, we have some of those workflows running at some people actually, then this was the best addition I could make to fix that problem. Because you can make a new workflow and you can say, hey, run it over there instead. Like, let that one handle it and let me just finish my job right here. It will basically speed things up and run more things in parallel. And that's a really good thing, right? It's scalability. And that's a key aspect to all of this. So as for the use cases I mentioned earlier, we have loops and loops within loops, as well as stuff like, so a specific one I mentioned is like, if you have emails are tricky because emails have emails with attachments, and attachments can have attachments inside of them. Say it's a zip, So it's all of a sudden like you need to loop the tickets and you need to loop the attachments. Maybe you need to loop the attachments within the zip, and then you're getting to like a infinite level of like downward spiral of zip analysis, and it's going to be a lot of loops basically, and you don't want that. So why not instead have like a standard way of handling zips? This is how you unzip something, and you always go here to handle it. Always get this workflow to handle it. Okay, then it turns back to the other one. Okay, now we want to handle the attachments inside the zip. Okay, this is how we analyze attachments. This is how we analyze IPs, stuff like that. Okay, now this is one of the later additions to Shuffle, which wasn't there from the start, but it's a really important point. And what it is authentication. Authentication is a way for us to store everything for you for an app. This has to be defined by the developer of the app. Like, do you use like an API key? Do you use like OAuth? Do you use some custom thing? Whatever, it's controlled by the organization. That's what it gets back to. It always gets back to the organization controlling the whole thing. And that means if you have VirusTotal over here, you need to renew your key over here. You can set a new VirusTotal key, and then you can spread it everywhere so that everyone uses the same authentication. You can reuse them. It's really, really friendly to use, basically, or that's what I'm trying to do at least. On the right side here, you can see how it's being used. You have the authenticate VirusTotal with like a plus button, and the plus button says opens the window you see on the very right side, where you have to define what you want the name to be for the authentication, and you have to define the API key or something to have for it, so that you can save it and keep it in the background for later. And after submitting, it's used for the app, and you can use it forever with any other app as well. That's any other of the same app. Okay, now we're getting into more new territory. So most of the things we've talked about now for the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes are things that's been made in the last 2 months. So if you haven't touched Shuffle since it was released back in May, June last year, now is the time, because we have the features. Now the feature set for Shuffle is at the point where everything is possible. Instead of having like most things are possible, now we're at the point where everything is possible, but we need to optimize and get it better. And this is an example of that, because I mentioned attachments earlier. Emails with attachments. How do you analyze those? How do you get into each and every part of them when you don't have a file system, like no way to handle files in general? So files in Shuffle are kind of tricky as a user to understand when you first get started, and that's my fault because I haven't developed it to be that way yet for you to understand it and use them. But they are created by apps. So in this case, on the right side, you can see on the very top, it creates a dummy file. And the dummy file is basically just something that's being created as to put some data into it and testing files. And then underneath it, we have the Shuffle Tools app, which zips the file previously described. So all files are defined by an ID. Basically, we have IDs for everything. You can say, hey, go get this file, please. And if you're in the right organization, you can use it. That's it. Like you can use it easily and get far. And this is all we need to be able to build a proper file system. It's not super efficient yet. It's going to get there. But here we just do like, we create a file. The file is zipped underneath. The next one is getting the same file, and then it's getting the zipped file, and then the last one is reading the file that was unzipped again. Just to show that there are ways of doing this where you can take a zip, you can take a RAR file, you can take a 7-zip, you can have a password on the zip, you can have PDFs, you can read all this kind of stuff and just put it in Shuffle and it will handle it. A good example of this as well is something like, say you want to analyze a file and you have Yara rules. Shuffle can kind of do it for you, but it's hard to define the Yara rules. But it's really easy to to make it apply the error rules to every file that goes through your system, or wherever you get your files that you want to analyze. Depends on your enterprise, I guess. And again, these are also controlled by the organization on the organization level. So if you're in the same organization, it works. Now here, we get into more specific. This will be our last one before we take a break again. This is us talking about executions again, because now we have explored a tiny bit of like, how do you make a file system? How do you touch with VirusTotal, etc. Again, we will do this by hand right after the break. But so for this one, we are basically looking at all the executions that have happened in the past, and it's limited to something like 20 or 30 right now. You can get all of them as well, of course, but it's limiting in the front end to show you only 20 or 30, the latest ones. And the really important thing here, so for executions, is that this is a powerful view that can help you build out your workflow further. I'm using it all the time when I demo workflows, when I build things for customers, when I build things for partners, whatever. I use the execution view all the time, because that's where you can see the magic happen. That's where you can manage and verify everything. So right here, we are going to explore the results of one execution. So at the top, you can see the all executions view, and you can have you can refresh all the executions underneath. You just click it, and it gets all the new ones, the latest ones. And if something runs every second, this is getting tricky. So we made systems for that as well. So you can see the latest one you clicked and find back to it. I'll show you more. Clicking one of them shows the view we see on the very right. So clicking it shows the execution itself. It lets you explore the specific one. So if we go way back to the workflows view, the initial one, it's the same thing basically, except this one is more powerful because it has access. You have access to it straight inside Shuffle, and it has a feature that I'm pretty sure none of you have used at all, like almost no one, just because it's another thing that was created recently, which lets you look at the executions and autocomplete stuff while you're making the workflow itself. So you can look at this variable and get the data you want, or autocomplete, paste it in, it works. That's it. These are, if it's JSON data, as talked about earlier, it will be parsed. If it's not JSON, it will not be parsed. It will just be a string that you see there, like some result, basically. Anyway, I think that's time for now. Actually, no, it's 1 more minute. So let's do that last minute. So this one also shows the execution argument. In this case, we don't see it because there's no execution argument, but it's creating the dummy file. It's creating the zip file. You can see them all happening underneath each other and exploring them. And now, I talked about this feature that's really good to use for debugging and in general creating complex structures. And it's this little arrow thing. So there's a tiny arrow thing that when you click it, it opens this new window, which is a pop-out that you can keep there forever. So you need to cross it out and to get it to move away. But you can also move it around on your screen and put it where you want it to not like fill up too much space. It's a really good way of exploring the results of something that happened in the past. And you can also click, like there are 3 buttons in it, one for success, one for errors, that will look for error versions of itself. So clicking the success will find a successful one. Clicking the error will find an error version. And then there's like the tiny eye. Anyway, let's do that after the break. So let's take like 10 minutes. Just because we were late, I'm sorry about that. Again, let's take 15 minutes and be back here at 3, and then we'll continue. I'll jump into the user interface and start clicking around. So I'll show you guys some stuff. We are a little bit behind schedule, so we will miss some parts, but I want to focus on all of this stuff. Anyway, let's get back here at 3. Let's take a break. All right, everyone, welcome back. This is where we left off. So now we just have this one and one more slide, and then we'll get into the user interface. So what's going to happen now is we'll do 45 minutes, and then we'll do a shorter break, like a 5 or 10 minute break at 3:45, and that's Japanese time. I'm not sure when that is in Italy. And from there we'll finish up and do everything in the user interface and try to show you guys what's missing, like what are you not understanding, what do you want to see, basically. That's the last session, so please think about that for the last while. But now we're going to jump into the user interface a bit. I still have to show you some integration parts, but we'll go through that way faster. So right now I'm just going to do what we've been talking about, all these slides in succession, and build them in real time for you. So right here, this is the last thing we'll do. This is basically the same interface, like the hover over effect that I mentioned earlier, which is new, that almost no one is using, I believe. And I'll show some stuff related to this as well. So yeah, here's just a quick recap of everything we've dealt with. There's a lot to, if you want to learn all of it, it takes a while. But you don't have to. Like the focus is the bottom left, basically. Like make the bottom left super good, the workflows, and then it's good. Okay, next up we're going to get into apps and integrations, but instead of that, before that, let's spend at least like 15-20 minutes in the user interface and get familiar by clicking around a bit. Now I'm not sure if you're following, so I don't have a second screen here right now, so you'll have to follow in my same screen here too. But I'm not sure if you do. But if you have a second screen and you have Shuffle running, please follow along and build it out, or just tab back and forth like I will be doing. So first, we were just going to create a demo workflow. So we did this already, but I'm going to make another one. Here we first start by we add the name, we add a tag and everything, like I mentioned earlier. And we get in here and we have this start node already presented for us. So this start node is essentially just a way for us to create something and run something and see some data. So by clicking this one, we can see this bar on the right-hand side here, and we can change all the actions in real time. So say, hey, we want to like use the action repeat back to me, which essentially just like echoes something. It's saying the same thing back to you, like, hey, this is Fredrik. So if I send this now, I save. So this one is orange, as we talked about, and then I click to play. Then this one should start up in the UI, and in a few seconds it's running and it's telling us, hey, this is Fredrik, right? And now we also talked about arguments, like execution arguments. Now again, I'm not going to talk about apps yet, like confusing things with apps. Now we're just going to talk about UI things for Shuffle itself. So here we got this back, but now we want to have this as a variable. So first of all, we talked about how variables work. So some of you might know this, some of you might not. But what I want to do now is I want to take the second one here and get the data from the first one. So we have the testing 2, the second one, and we can click like repeat back to me here. And we want this data from this one. And what's really good here is we don't really, since it's no JSON, there's no magic in it, we just have to get the data. We talked about this button right here. So this one, when I hover, it might be too small. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. There we go. Autocomplete. It says basically autocomplete text. So you can click it, and then you have access to these 2 buttons. So as you see, when I hover over the start node, it becomes orange. And when I hover the execution argument, it becomes orange in the bottom left. So you can always see what you're trying to look for. And this is like an important way to just like understand, where do I want my data to come from? And we will make this more obvious over time, so it's easier and easier to understand. Right now, we're just going to say that this one wants to do the same as the first one. It's going to repeat the same data. We save again. Now, This is always how I start when I program as well. I just build like super basic things and I start to understand it and we run it all the time. And there we go. We have a result from both of them in 2.5 seconds. So the second one now got the same data from the start node, which is, hey, this is Fredrik. But now we can also incorporate the execution argument for this, which is this thing down here, which has a lot of auto completions here I can put in actually. But if I take this data where it says, hey, this is Fredrik, and I put it down here instead. Now, the question is basically, how can we use this data inside of this node up here? And the answer is basically we do the same thing. We click this thing here, click execution argument. And as you see, like in the bottom left there, it's hovering over, hey, this is Fredrik when I do this. And it's becoming orange around it. And when I click, it's auto completion, save. And as it's being saved, you can run it. And now this should do the exact same thing once again, but it's using variables. So this is how variables throughout Shuffle work. You can send them around between nodes. You can use them everywhere else. So even if we make like to just prove a point here, you can do like this one, and just put them after each other. Put this one here, put this one here, and this last one here can still use the data from the first one. This is how it always works. Like you can always use, because the arrow is pointing this way towards this one, and this is the start node, which is the circle. It can always use data from either one of these past ones, anywhere, basically. And to prove that point, we just click the repeat back to me thing again, and now you can see all the different nodes it's highlighting here. You can see it really slowly if I go slowly here. Start node, it's orange. Now we set testing 1 to orange, set testing 2 to orange, and we can do the execution argument. So you can choose this again. So I click I want to use the start node for this one and put that data into it. We save again, same as always, and we run. So this is kind of like the process of creation for Shuffle. It's you go through it a little by little, and as you start understanding these aspects of Shuffle, you will learn to understand that there's a lot of capabilities there. Like if you're new to this kind of system or programming or anything, it might be hard to see why this is going to work. But this is the essence of all of programming. It's about sending data through the systems. This one wants to get access to this one, and this one wants to get access to both of them. And then you need to create a workflow for it. So the testing app is just a way of doing that really easily. So now let's start working with some JSON. So we had some JSON back in our material here. So I'm going to go back in here. Let's see, where was it? We have this one, that's the hashes one. We had the Fredrik one with the product shuffle. So I'm just going to take this one. Hopefully it works. Copy. And we will put this one in the execution argument. Paste as plain text. So now we have this whole thing pasted here as JSON. So now, as we run this without changing anything, we should see that it will be parsed as JSON inside this execution window on the side here. And that's exactly what we get. Thankfully, it's as expected. So right here, we have we can see exactly what's in here. We have the name, Fredrik. We have the product name, Shuffle. And we have the same for all of these nodes down here. So just to clean this up a bit, I will just remove some nodes by deleting them. We'll just click this one, and now, okay. So here's a point to the last thing we talked about, which I'm pretty sure no one's been using yet, which is something that will be really powerful when you start using it, which is this button right here. So right next to the top, what are actions it says there. There's a tiny little button next to it. It's not the best button, but it's a button. And what it does is you click it, and it shows you the exact last result for this node. And this is really good because you can find one that didn't work and one that did work for it. You can just click this once and it will find one. So for this one, since there's no failed ones, it's not going to find any. And if you want to see this exact execution, you can go into the Explore execution. So you can see this exact one that did run last time, that it worked. So these are ways of exploring Shuffle that are good at explaining. It's going backwards through the same process of going forwards. Basically, you can everything you do, you can do in a different way. That's the whole point, without making the UI super hard to understand. So anywhere you see this little arrow, like here as well, you can click it and you will get the result in this window. So if I click the start node now, it now shows start node as the data. So now, what if we want the testing one right here to use only Fredrik from this one? All you have to do is either, there are multiple ways of doing this, but if I click here, now you can see next to start node, there's like an arrow. There's a tiny arrow down here. This arrow proves that it's an autocomplete. Now this system isn't perfect, but it will show you exactly what you can choose. So if you see here, this is a key, and a key means basically the name Fredrik from this part here is being put inside this key called name right here. So if you click this one, it's being auto-completed as start node.name. So it's getting this data from this one, like Fredrik right here. And here's another way of doing the exact same thing. You can do it multiple ways, as I said. So by going into this window right here, if I want to know how to make shuffle or get shuffle this location here into the data, I can click this one, and it says here copied blah 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 dot name. So I can just put this straight in here now because it's been copied to the clipboard. And by doing that and saving and running it, we should have the same result. Again, it's basically just getting the data and from the data, there we go. So what it did now, for the second one, we got the name Fredrik here, we got the product shuffle right here, and it got shuffle, returned us shuffle because that's what this one was. And just to prove that point, and it's not some scheme, we can go in here and change the name to be like hello, and this is the execution, and now it's this second one right here should return hello. So this is a way of like, if you have an ID, you can get the ID in this way. Now this one returned hello. So this is the full circle of how to work with variables inside of Shuffle. And you can do it for the same for stuff like conditions too. So conditions are, again, ways of saying it should happen or it shouldn't happen. So let's try a condition for the same thing. Right here, we can just take the same thing right here. We click this as, I'm just going to go back here so you can see it. Where are the conditions? Yeah, here are the conditions. So conditions are, if you click the arrow, if you click the line itself between two, you can create a condition. And this is an important point there to control conditions in general. So now we can click new condition up here, and it will open this window you showed. You can also see down here, conditions can't be used for loops. This is just to tell you, please don't use it for loops because it's not going to work properly. But now we can do the same thing as we did earlier and say that this will only run if this start node.product.name is something like shuffle. So we have click here and we can type shuffle. And now we create basically a way of checking. We only want to run this part of the workflow if it's shuffle in the product name. If it's the product name of something else, it's not going to run. So let's just save this one. So now it's not going to work because we already changed it to be hello. But for our next part, it might work again because we can change it back to shuffle and then you'll see. So this one should shout at us and say, hey, this one stopped working. Let's see. Yeah, and here you can see the same thing. Failed condition, hello equals shuffle. And it's because it doesn't equal shuffle, right? So here's basically just a simple test case for printing it. So now it shows you a failure, it stops working because the condition doesn't work. And that also means if I add another node back here, this one should not run either. So I'm just adding that one just to prove the same point. If testing 1 now stops working, testing 2 should also stop working because it's behind testing 1. So just restarting this execution now. And we now have 3 nodes and, oh, that was fast. Okay, so this one says hello equals shuffle, and this one was skipped because of previous node. So it's skipped because of this node right here. because this one was failure, this one became skipped. And then we can remove this and just see the success. So you can see exactly what happened. You can go back in time. By clicking up here, we can go back and see other executions that happened, and just make them happen, basically. So let's see. Let's go here and change this one to be shuffle now. And by doing that, we should now have a working solution that runs all 3 nodes, because the product name is shuffle. And these are, again, they might be a little confusing for newcomers, but they are also a powerful way of controlling how data flows through your network. And right here it says shuffle, so it seems it worked. We have a success, and testing 2 also has a success instead of being skipped. But now what we have is something that actually the failed one. This one failed. So for this one, we should be able to find a failed execution too. Yeah, as you can see here, find successful execution, this button, which was mentioned earlier. It finds a successful execution for this one. And if you think there's a bad execution, if you want to verify, you can now click this one, and it will show you failure for this one as well. And this is kind of like how you can start understanding how the data is and how you can explore it and how you can understand it and putting it in different areas. And this is the prelude to being able to work with stuff like lists and other integrations. This is basically, if you understand how this works with the testing app, you will understand how to do it later with anything. This is the basics of Shuffle. And now I've explained it for 15 minutes. And I hope it's clear to most of you guys. Now, I would also love if you tell me like what you don't understand about this and what is confusing about it, because I've been working with it so much that I know the ins and outs. I've built it out, right? So I would love to understand why something is confusing and stuff like that. Please give me feedback on that stuff. And yeah, here, by the way, we can click Explore Execution, and it shows us the execution for the failed execution right here. Yeah. So you can always use like these windows right here. You can move them around on the screen. You can copy the result as well if you want to and put it somewhere like this. So now we copied this data. You just click it and it's copied. All of this stuff is here basically so that it's easy for you to understand how Shuffle works in general. Let's see. So next part of what we're going to do is basic loops. Loops are kind of the bane of this whole system, but it's also a really interesting part of the whole system, which makes it work really well. We will get into app creation in a second, but first I want to just show you the basics of loops. So first, let's go back here, back into our presentation. Right here, we have some hashes. And what I want to do is I want to create a new workflow where we can handle these hashes. Or actually, let's, instead of a new workflow, let's create so that a sub workflow can handle these hashes. And this is going to be a little bit different. So what I will do now is I will create something so that VirusTotal will be running and getting the hashes one by one. So again, this will be a little bit confusing, but I will show you over time how this all works. This is the new trigger, and I hope it's been helpful to those that have looked at it. I know you have a little bit News at least, and it should help a lot of people understand how to deal with individual data in an easy way instead of having to loop stuff all the time. Anyway, let's start working on loops. So let's go back, remove all this stuff, and start from scratch. Let's first start by just printing the hashes that we just copied from the Shuffle training up there, and run it. Now let's hope all the JSON is okay, so it works right off the bat. Yeah, there we go. So this one now shows we have hashes 1, 2, and 3. And we now want to use this in our next node to print them one by one. So now, how do we do that is the question. We can take another node. Again, I'm using testing because this is all about understanding the basics of Shuffle. It's not about how do you use everything. But this one will now run with the start node's data as a loop. That's the point. So I can click again on this one, which says autocomplete text, click it, click start node, and now it says right here, hashes list. So if I click this one, it auto-completes the whole list for us, and we can save it. And now this one should, in theory, just return all the hashes to us one time, or as a list. So the thing that's happening in the background here is that this node is actually run 3 times. Instead of running 1 time and just returning the data, it's ran 3 times. So to prove that point, we can do something like, let's see, we can say like hello in here. We can say hello before it. Now I'm hoping this works. The parser isn't always happy about this kind of stuff, but I'm pretty sure most of it has been oiled out. Okay, we got a result. Let's hope we have some hellos in here. There we go. So it says hello, this one, hello, this one, hello, this one. It doesn't just say hello and the whole array at the same time. But if we want the whole array, this should work. Now that I remove the hashtag on the end, it should just say hello and the whole array in there. So this won't necessarily be valid JSON. So this one might actually not work at all. Let's see. There we go. So it's not valid JSON, basically. As you can see here, it says hello, and it parses the whole array for us in here. And that's basically to prove that there's a difference between the hashtag and the not hashtag being used in there. But we can also make this into JSON if we want to, right? We can even recreate the same JSON field as earlier. So we can do something. Oh, sorry about that. Norwegian letters. We do like hashes here as JSON, and here we can do like this, and we're basically recreating all of the JSON right here. So like this should be valid JSON again, and return us with hashes and the full list inside of it, where hashes is uppercased, and it's essentially handling of the data. So right here, it returned us a valid JSON again with hashes, like right here. We have all this data underneath. Same goes for this one, right? So the difference there is this one was created by us, and this one was like copy pasted from the training. But it's based on the same data, so it's passing the same data around. So from this point, basically, the question becomes like, how do you actually use this data? How do you use it in a real environment? And what I want to do here is I want to do two ways of the same thing, kind of. I want to, one, have a virus total version of this where we just check all the hashes in virus total, and 2, I want to print out, how do I say this? I want to print them out one by one in a different workflow, to run a different workflow with this data, so that we can create something real from this stuff. But one thing that's missing here actually is if I just start scrolling down, we don't actually have virus total here. And I can verify that by going to the app section up here as well. So we haven't talked about this yet actually, but now it's the time, because we've basically done everything you need to do in a workflow in 20 minutes. So it's not that hard to like understand everything that's going on here. It just takes a bit of practice, and you'll get used to this data flow. But yeah, we want to use virus total now. And before the workflow, I sent out like, hey, these are not really requirements, but you should have a virus total key ready somewhere to be able to do this. So right here, we can search for the app virus total. So it does exist, but the difference is basically all of these up here, we can see on the left-hand side here, they are green. You can see green on the side. These, however, are not green, or these are green. But if I keep scrolling down, is it? We start seeing orange. And orange is a bit different, because orange means it's not ready yet. You need to say, hey, I want to use this one. And the reason for that is basically there's no reason you shouldn't do that. We can in the future make it so you can decide to do this, of course. There's already an alternative so that when you start the instance, it works. But an issue with that is stuff like, say, the hide. we don't know what URL you're running the Hive on, so we want you to like activate it yourself. And by activating, you click this one, and you have to paste in your URL right here. But like for things like VirusTotal, it could entirely be possible to just have it ready from the get-go. So what we're going to do now, I haven't exactly explained everything here though, so let's just do that first. But I want to use VirusTotal as an example because I'm pretty sure most security professionals, even though I never used VirusTotal in our professional environment, some of you might have. I also believe most security professionals have been in touch with VirusTotal in some capacity, so it's a good baseline to use. Plus, it's a cloud service, so it's easy to just like test with it and use it for everything. So here we can click it, and that selects it. It selects it. It's orange right here, as you can see, so it's not ready. It's not to be used for shuffle yet. But here on the side, you can still explore it. You can delete it, which is not ideal right now. You can also activate it, which means just make it ready so it's usable in a workflow. Under here, though, before you activate, you can also still explore all of the actions that are inside of it. You can do this for any app in general. You can just search for it right here, like say MISP, click MISP. All of a sudden, you have these functions here for actions, and you can do this for anything basically. What are they called? Like URL scan. Here you can like scan or submit URLs really easily. Like all of this stuff, there are services for all of them. And just to be upfront about it, we do have an extended version of it on our website, which are more apps than you get per default in your open source environment, and they will load here in a second, basically. And they are much more expansive than this. So all of these are basically apps, and you can try to search for something here on our website and see if it exists. And please, if there's something that's missing, this is really important to us, by the way, so that we can work best with the community in general. We've created this field right here, where just put in your email or something, like put something in the email field, and in the apps field, just type something, and I will get a notification about it, so that I know that we need to create something new for you. But here you can also search for stuff really fast, and we have this. You can go to /search, and you get the same thing. It's essentially a way of exploring. Now this one, it takes a bit to load because there's a lot of apps in here, and everything. It's not optimal yet, to say the least. But it works to explore apps really well. So you can do like Google Cloud Platform. There we go. We have all these integrations available. They're just not properly ready to be given to everyone yet. But these are. So the things that the ones you actually get straight into your user interface on the open source version are ready for use, and that's the difference there. So they are verified basically to work at least partly with the services they are created for. And if we're missing something, again, please just tell us and we will get into it and fix it. So now, anyway, we talked about VirusTotal a lot. I'm just going to click it right here and select it. And now what we're going to do is essentially we're going to activate this app. So everything that's like this, it's again inactive, and it's to be generated. So it's going to generate the code in the background. This is one of the main features of Shuffle that makes it super, super good to use, because you can like click activate app right here. And from here, you have like a huge list of things that's working. And this is using HTTP and a REST API basically to do all this stuff. And here's the default actions. And if you want to change one, you just click it, and you can like click out of it, and you can save down here. So if I save, now saving, I will go through each part of this as well, but saving here takes a bit the first time, because it has to build the Docker image, it has to build all the Python code, it has to prepare everything basically, but it's mainly the Docker part. But once it's built once, if I click here now, it should be almost instant, basically. It takes a few seconds, and it's done, basically. So now we have VirusTotal available. That's how easy it is. Like you can just go in there, click save, and it's ready. And now by refreshing, I'm just going to save, make sure to save. If I refresh this window in the workflow, VirusTotal, by activating it, it's up here up top. because it's the latest one we have fixed and edited to be good, basically. Now you can just take it into the view right here, and it's usable. So that's kind of how this whole shebang works. It's not too hard to build out in general, and basically it's easy to find apps that others have built and put them in your process, because you just get them straight in the UI here, and you can just drag and drop them into the UI. You can use many of the same nodes and everything. And before you even activate them and build them out, you can verify them properly on your system here. So about apps, let's go back to the training a little bit. I'm going to go through apps super quickly, though, so that we can get back to building, because that's a more interesting part, in my opinion. One of our goals here will be scanning hashes as loops with VirusTotal. And the other one will be creating a new endpoint for VirusTotal to upload files, because we talked about files. I haven't shown files yet, but I want to upload a file just to show you how that works and how you can use the app creator from Shuffle to do that directly. And I'm going to do it live instead of I don't have it prepared here exactly how to do it. This is something I'll go out on the internet and find out how to do. I've done it before. Don't take me wrong. I prepared for this, but it's not hard to do at all, basically, at this point. So here's the view you just saw. It's the same as earlier. You can see all the integrations that we have available. You can search, you can see, you can download, you can refresh, all that stuff. You can create a new app on the left side. We're not going to create a new one today. We're just going to edit, but it's the same thing. You just have to define all these fields. So up here, we have the app uploads or downloads, and they are up here in the right corner. So these are two buttons that are really important for especially developers. So the first button is like a refresh button, and it's used for Python development. The right button is, and the Python development is based on a local repository you have on your computer. I can show you that as well, just to like, we have 1 more hour, so I'll go through this quickly. But it's a way to develop apps with Python really quickly instead of having to reload everything and restart the system. And I wanted everything to be dynamic, basically, and easy for myself and other developers to use. And the other one is for downloading stuff from GitHub. You can also use like a username and password if you have private apps. Okay, so on the list on the right-hand side, there are 2 different kinds of systems that I didn't mention one of these actually. So if you see this cloud thing with a download thing, you can download the app locally to your computer as OpenAPI. So it's OpenAPI specification, which is a way to specify APIs in general. While if it does not have the cloud button, it is a Python app that is locally on your computer somewhere, or on the server that's running Shuffle, for that matter. And the discrepancy there is basically you can't edit the ones without the cloud button if you don't know how to code, and that's the hard thing. And I'm trying to do everything with the app editor when I can. But in some cases, there are just some, like Amazon, are really hard to deal with because their authentication mechanism is super complex, requiring timestamps and a lot of stuff, while others are just API keys. And the API keys and REST APIs are super easy, and we do them with App Editor. Okay, here's the exploration view. You can search, as shown before, you can click them, and you can activate them, you can find them, etc. As you can see on the side here, these 2 are actually the same app, but one of them has a download button, and that's because it's ready. It's basically being built, while the other one is not. It's not ready yet. Here we have like the activate app button, which I talked about earlier, which is used to edit an app, essentially. You can make it ready for use instantaneously. So here's the top parts of the app creation view. Once you get into it, this is what you see. You see a name, you can see an image. You can click here as well. You can click the image and change it if you want to. Change it to something that fits more to your liking. By default, it's either shuffle or nothing. I don't remember, but it's obvious that you should add an image in there. I'll just show you super quickly if you build from scratch. So here I am in the user interface again, going back. If we just want to make a new app from scratch, there's a button right here saying create from scratch. If you click that one, you get this empty interface right here. And from here on, you have to build it from scratch, but it's pretty simple, and we'll get into it. But it's you can go here, you can take a picture from somewhere, you can just open it, and it will be uploaded right there and be ready right off the bat. So it's usable and it's user-friendly, basically, is the point. Make it user-friendly for people that are not coders, is the whole point. Okay, back to the presentation. So this top part here, you can click the learn more about application to learn a little bit more. It's not perfect yet, but you can learn a little bit at least about how all this works. But this is kind of like you have to define a name, you have to define a description for the app you're creating, and this is just to make it easily findable for other people. That's the important thing long term, right? It's you don't want to remake something someone else made. And that's also why we've created a repository on our website, so that you can, like, instead of making something new, start by looking there if it exists already, and then you can go and check locally, or check GitHub and start building. So here's app activation, and this is the second part, which describes what's the URL. You have to define what's the URL. And what's the authentication mechanism for Shuffle itself, or no, for the app itself that we are building. And in this case, we are building out VirusTotal VT API version 2, apparently, which translates to something that uses like a normal API key for authentication, and it's put in the query. So a query is a part of the URL where you put the API key. And this is the way of telling Shuffle, here's how you do it. So going back into Shuffle again, by going to apps and finding VirusTotal again, we can change this easily. Click this one, edit, and right here we can choose the mechanism for authentication. No authentication, API key, we have bearer auth, which is a totally different thing, and we have basic auth, which uses like a username and password. Now, these are not expansive enough to cover everything that are authentications, but these are the basic ones, and they cover, I would say, 90% of all cases of all REST APIs. So you can easily make stuff with them. I'll get more into the actions as well. Let's see. So back to the presentation. This on the right side here is how you actually authenticate the thing. So this is how you use it inside a workflow itself. You take it's auto-filled in there, and you need to fill in the API key, basically. Once you fill it in, it's ready. You can use it everywhere. So building something with authentication over here, like building with the app creator or app editor, and then saving it means that you can authenticate it over here, and then it's saved forever, so you can use it with whatever you want. Not forever, until you want to delete it, I guess. Okay. Now, actions. I mentioned actions a little bit earlier. So actions are the parts of Shuffle that actually do something. These are the real Python code that's running in the background. They will get the URL for you. They can post, delete, etc. All the HTTP functions, and we're planning on adding so you can put Python straight in there and just like run some Python if you want. Just because that sounds like a really good idea for long-term users, so you don't have to know how to build everything in the background. So each of these translates into an action in the workflow view, where you can see it says on the left side, it says get comments, write comment, blah, 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 going down there for VirusTotal. On the right side, you can see the exact same ones. You can see the same function names, but on the left side, you can see what's inside of them. You can see that one of them is for comment, one of them is for domain, the other, but the user interface is in the workflow is for a user, while the app creator is more for you as a creator of an app. And it generates everything for you to be ready straight into Shuffle, and that's the important thing. And now let's get into one specific. Actually, no, apparently not. Let's do some tags first. So while we're activating an app, we can also set some tags and categories, and these will be long-term really important because we are working on standardizing. So say you work with threat intel vendor X, we want there to be a way for us to know that it's a threat intel platform. So please remember to tag and categorize things. You don't need a perfect name for it, but please put something in there so that it's possible to understand what you've built. Like, is it a ticketing system? Is it a communication system? Is it an email app? Whatever it is, please just put something in the tags and category on the bottom, because this will make sure that Shuffle in general becomes better long term, because we can change out your system easily. If you have a threat intel vendor, we will create a standard way of contacting threat intel vendors and create translators. So you can, like, if you have VirusTotal today, and you have and you're planning to change to like something else, like a recorded future or passive total or something, then or MISP for that matter, we want to have a translator from VirusTotal into the other one, and you can swap back and forth really easily. Like, this is the dream of a SOAR in general, which no one has solved, but we truly believe that this is the way to do it, and we will find a way to do it properly. And that's what the tags and categories are for. Long term, it's going to benefit everyone in the entire community. So here, after building something, as I showed you, it's usable. You can use it straight off the bat. And you can even go back and edit it. You can download the app, you can delete the app. And to be able to actually edit this, you just need to have a little bit of HTTP understanding. And anyone that's technical, especially in security, have not necessarily the best. Like, most of us have touched Burp Suite and done some web app testing or something like that, except if we're very new. So you will have some HTTP understanding, and that's all you need to be able to do this. You don't need a magic, you don't need like 4 months of practice of coding to be able to write something. So now what we're going to do is make a new app for this. And you can see here it says VirusTotal file search. Now this one is using file search here, but after that I also created another one for file upload, which we will do instead. But this one essentially takes the API right here. For this one, I have like 2 more minutes, I believe. Yeah. It takes this API, and you can put it straight in here. You copy the curl command, you just paste it, and it will automatically become the URL you want. And this is kind of like the magic that you can build in this kind of products, where we can parse your curl command into a proper action and it's finished. It's that simple, really. Like, it's finished after that point. You don't need a lot of fixing. So here's app development and how you can save something with the file search. So what I want to do now, first of all, right after the break, is we will make the file upload one, and we will try to make it work. Hopefully it will work. And from having the file upload, we will be able to find our hashes and do all our stuff with VirusTotal. I will also authenticate with VirusTotal before that, just so that you know, just so that I don't have to show you guys credentials for this stuff. Here's a recap for the apps, and there's a lot to it, but it's also pretty simple when you first get started. So after the break, we'll make sure to create. We will search for apps, search for hashes first, and then we will create our own action with with file upload to VirusTotal and get the result afterwards. All right, see you guys in 10 minutes. at 15:55. That's in 10 minutes. I hope everyone's doing all right still, even though it might have been going a little bit slow at times, might have been going fast. Depends on your experience level with the whole project. But we need to look at some real use cases, and I saw a tiny discussion on Slack where you mentioned like an issue with stuff like lists in lists and things like that, and they are solvable. All of them are solvable, but we don't have really good ways of doing it yet. But I can show like stuff like that. But before that, I want to just show a basic use case with like a list, because we haven't actually done that yet. And after the fact, we will do a little bit with file uploads. And lastly, let me show you something with list in list and how I believe we can handle it. Might not be the best or most obvious way, but it does work. So yeah, let's get back to app development. So what I've done during lunch actually is I have, let's see, I need to close this one. What I've done during our lunch, during our break, is I've created an authentication here. And the reason I did that is just because I don't want you to see my VirusTotal credentials right now. But I'll show you how this works anyway. So if you create like a new integration for something, like say VirusTotal, and you want to use like the authentication for it somewhere, then or you want to actually take use of the app in general, then all you have to do is kind of click it and go to the authentication part on the side here, and click the plus. Even if you don't see this whole thing right here, click the plus. Then you can type in here. It's the same thing we said earlier. Type a name for it, VirusTotal Demo API, and you can always find your API like on the VirusTotal page. But I'm not going to do that right now. I saved another one for that. And we can do like, just put your API key in here, right? Whatever it is, and then submit. And it's ready. Now you can use this API. And my LastPass is shouting at me. So from here, we have to decide like what authentication to use. So another thing I actually did now, which is another feature, right, is I set the start node. So I click the set start node part right here, which says set start node. And when you click it, it's becoming the circle. So that means this is the starting action right now. And from here, I will select the authentication that was created for Shuffle. And I will try to search for Google using the credentials we just passed to Shuffle. And here we go. Let's hope this works. Right now, I'm doing a domain search for google.com using VirusTotal and my API key. And it seems to work. So we got a result from VirusTotal now, which says a lot of stuff. There's a lot of like search engine stuff because it's google.com, right? So it makes sense. If you have a URL that you know is malicious, we can try that as well. But the point here is to show the data that you actually get from it and how you can use the data in general. So it was mentioned earlier about like lists and stuff, and we haven't really gone into lists and how they're done yet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the hashes that we put in here. Yeah, I will try to take this one and take these hashes and put them inside the VirusTotal get hash, so that there are 3 hashes and we will get results for all those hashes. So to do that, we need to do something like, oh, this is the start node now. So it's telling us it's the start node. We need to make this the start node again. Now we do this. And this one is now sending all the hashes. And VirusTotal can now get all the hashes from the testing1 list. So now this one will receive all the hashes from this node right here, and from the first one for that matter, really. So right now I'm just saving. We can click the test execution, and hopefully for each part of the hash, we are now running the action get hash. Let's see. So we can see 3 results. This is a good result. And here we receive the scan Here's the scan, we get total positive 67. And here we get 55 out of 68. So all of these have been checked. We got results for the hashes. But now the question is basically, instead of handling hashes handling everything in this way, is there a different way of handling lists? Because the issue here is that this one will now again return a list. So all of a sudden you have to learn and work with a list in a list and a list and a list, and keep doing that over and over. But that's kind of hard to do long term. So so that's why we made the trigger called shuffle workflow. So this one can essentially do the same thing. So instead now of using VirusTotal as the app to handle the list, we will start 3 new workflows, 1 for each hash. And a really good reason to do that is to be able to see what happens exactly with your hash, and you can, or your data that you're sending to it, and it's just handling 1 hash at a time from the get-go. So it will be a little bit different, but it does the same thing. And I'm just going to show this really quickly. So first, we have to create a new workflow. I now realize we should have a create new workflow within this app itself, or this trigger. So let's just create a VirusTotal workflow hash or something. Test. Yeah. Like this. Okay. Now we're inside it, and we just want VirusTotal to be the only main workflow. We click here for VirusTotal authentication, which is the one I made. And now what we're going to do is this workflow will now receive each hash 1 at a time. So what we want to do is just type exec, because it's just going to receive 1 hash. And this is how you handle this in a simpler fashion, basically. So if I take this one and remove the VirusTotal part there, and inside the shuffle workflow part, we can decide we want to, here it says, what are subflows? From the top, it says parameters, select a workflow to execute. So we can decide what workflow we want to use here. It's sending it, and here it says execution argument. You can put some data in here for whatever you want, and I'm just pasting the same data in. And now we can save. And what should happen now is, so just to validate that all of this works, this is a workflow that has not been run before. So that means in here in the executions, it's empty. So if I run it once now, I'm just going to run it manually once without anything. So VirusTotal might shout. It's saying, hey, there's no result, basically. But if we go into executions now, we see 1 execution here. So now by running this, we have 3 hashes, and we can handle them 1 at a time. So if I run it now, hopefully, I'm not sure if I saved. Okay, it's running, and now hopefully the last one, yeah, it started. It ran 3 of them, and now we should be able to see 3 more executions right here. There we go, 3 more executions right here. And if I go into it, you can see this one has not. Oh, another bug actually. I was not aware of that. For strings, apparently there's a bug. So these are things for me to fix for later. But there are. So basically, this one should now receive every hash. We can fix this by parsing everything actually, by doing something like hash and sending it as an actual hash in here. Now this, I hope, should work. Then this one can use exec.hash because it's receiving 1 hash at a time as JSON. So this is kind of like the dynamic you start dealing with. So we will at some point make this so you can do everything in a single workflow. That's the goal of it. So that instead of having to like go from here and click into the other workflow, which I'm in here, you can just continue building like behind this one. So instead of showing this one, we will show the entire workflow for it right here. So you can just continue building. That's the goal of it, at least. But now, again, let's do the same thing and just fix this one. Hopefully it works from this point. and we have 3 more executions, and data coming in is hash, this one. So that's correct. And we got our virus total result. And the good thing about this is we actually got 1 hash at a time now, so we don't have to deal with a list. And then in theory, if there's a list in here again, we can do the same thing. But this, again, it seems kind of annoying to do in a lot of cases. But if you have a list in a list, like an email with an attachment, with which is a list again, like how do you deal with all that stuff, and how do you parse it and send it back and forth? That's the hard thing to do about this, and hard thing to actually understand in general. But this is the generic way of how hash how lists work. I'm not going to get into how we can use lists super specifically. What I want to focus on instead is our app in general. So right here we have VirusTotal. And VirusTotal is the app we have activated. We haven't created it from scratch, but we activated it at least. And what we didn't do with this one actually is we didn't make anything new. So what I want to do now, so I want to make a new one. I want to click here, which says a new action. And right here, there's a lot of stuff that we can do. But like we need to know what we want to do first in a way. So what I've done is I've pulled up the API for VirusTotal right here. And all I want to do is I want to copy all this data. So we want to do file scanning right now. We want to take a file, upload it to VirusTotal, and use our app creator to do that. So file uploads are the most complex things you can do in like a HTTP API in general. You do like, there's a lot to it basically. But it's not complex, and we've made it super simple here, I feel like. So just by taking the curl command right here, this is a trick that I've made for myself to make this easier. You just do for the URL path, you paste the curl in here, and it just fixes it for you. It makes it work for you, and it changes this to a post request and all that stuff that you need to make it work. So I'm just going to call this one file upload because it needs a name. And one thing that's not done with the curl thing yet is it doesn't enable the file upload, but that's what we're going to do now. You click this enable file upload thing, and right here it says form file equals something. Oops, everything way too big. File equals something something. And when you upload a file, this is the keyword that we're looking for in the curl request. So you just take this one and you put it in here, and that's the field that it needs to use to upload. And that's it. Like now we have a file upload system. And you can see it right here too. There's like a file icon, a tiny one. And if we go save it now, see? Let's hope it builds. As always, take a drink. And now it's ready. Now we can refresh and get all the new apps. I'm just going to use the VirusTotal workflow hash to test this whole thing. And we want to use this new one as our node. We want to set authentication for it. And we want to, let's see, where is it? File upload, it says right here. So now we need a file ID. Issue with that is we don't have a file ID right now. We don't have any files to actually handle. So what I want to do now is use this one as the subflow instead. So what I want to do is like we do exec.fileid. So we are going to pass a file ID to this one to upload to VirusTotal. And we will pass it from this one again. We will just like start a new path for it. And basically, let's say right here, let's make this a start node. And from here, there's an action down here. So there's a lot of actions in each of these ones, especially tools and shuffle, the testing app. Those do have a lot of like tools used for testing. This one can create a file, it can download a file from the internet, it can delete a file, all that stuff. So right now I'm just going to make a file, and it's going to be called like JSAC2021.txt. This is some test data for JSAC 2021. Okay, so this one will now create a file called JSAC2021.txt, that will be saved in Shuffle. And before we do anything else, again, it's always about testing, do this slowly. I know we don't have enough time here, but I kind of have some principles I try to build by to make it simpler for me to understand everything. Now that's another bug. It's good to see. But here we can see this one created a file for us, and the file itself was generated with this ID. So what we need to do now is take this field, which we just click here by doing, and we want to copy it. So instead of this one sending a hash, we want it to send the file ID. I'm just going to change this to, and we do like file ID here. And right inside here, this is a little bit complex again. We're building out a JSON field inside of it. We will send along the file ID, which was auto-completed by clicking here. From here, we can like check the last result for it. And you can just click this one. Click here, and you will copy the way of getting this data specifically. So now, what's going to happen is this one runs this workflow that we defined up here, and it executes it with this data. So now we're going to pass it a file. And this file that we've created, which is for JSAC2021, I hope that's okay to upload, will here by this one, we can call it like file upload, upload, there we go, call it file upload. And when we run this one now, it should send the file ID into this workflow so that this one can upload it to VirusTotal by itself. And this is kind of how you handle files. But before that, I want to show you that you can find files again. So all the files that have been made in Shuffle are available here by going to the admin panel and clicking files on the top here. So you first get to this one and you click files, and you can see it being made. Here's the hash for it and everything. So it's possible to go back and find all this data. You can also download it to just verify it's the same one. Let's see, this is some test data for JSAC. Yes, it looks like the same one, right? Now we want to try to upload this one. So we're just going to send it. Let's run and hope for the best. So first sends a file. Second workflow uploads every file that's been made. Let's see, 3 items authorized. Yes, it works. And now this one should have a new execution. There we go. See here. And this one, let's see here, file upload. It worked, looks to have worked. Scan request successfully queued. So now all we need to do is get scan results somewhere. So let's do that as well. Do we have a way of getting the scan result is the question. Get URL scan ID, probably not. Scan file report. This is probably what we're looking for, I'm guessing. So I'm just going to do the same thing as earlier. We just fix the app right away. We go in here, we make the same one, we use the curl command. It's going to require a resource, get file upload resource by ID, I guess. And then for the resource, we need to pass it in. We submit, we save, and it's done. Now we can get the file resource like this. So if we go back to our workflow now and we refresh, we can now use this new, oh, this is confusing. We can now use this new one, which is going to get file ID, file result, I guess. We use the VirusTotal authentication, and from here we get, what's it called? Get file upload by ID. And now we need to find out what field do we need to use. So in this one, we have scan ID, resource. I'm guessing it's this one, which says resource right here on the side. Click here, and it will copy it for you. We go into the get file results. We paste it in there. And so I'm guessing this is not going to work because it's going to be too fast. Like it's going to, 1, create a file. 2, it's going to upload it to VirusTotal. 3, it's going to get the result instantly. And if you get it instantly, it's not going to be finished. So what I want to do is I still want to just run this, just so you can see it. But it's essentially how you how you make something run instantaneously and get it to just work. And now I read the API documentation, copied it, made the app right away, implemented it in less than a minute, basically. It's a simple process once you get used to it. And it's way faster than writing a Python script that you need to make a function and make the requests and find the documentation for it and stuff like that. This is like how you do it quickly. And this is also why I love SOAR. So let's see. We actually found a result, it looks like. Right here. Get file results. That's right here. Oh, it's super big, apparently. So we uploaded and we got a result of, let's see, it's a big one. 0 of 58 for our JSAC file. So if you do this for like a real file, right, like some real malware, it will actually work out way better. You'll get a result. And right here, you can do something like if positives, if we take this one, if I click here, see, so it's copying the positives. Let's see, we go back to the top. I'm just going to show you some trick to this now. And this is like a crisis situation, right? And we want to do something like right here, we do send SMS with shuffle or send email with shuffle, and we want to create a condition. This is basically, okay, if there's a finding for this file that we found in VirusTotal, we want to create an alert somewhere. And this is going to be our simple way of checking if there's an alert. So I'm going to do this one. There's a lot of ways of comparing things. Like we had to go through this way too fast earlier. But like right here, we can do larger than 0. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, we have a match. What do we want to do? We want to send like an SMS to everyone. Like this is a horrible way of doing it, but it's also a good example of how it can be done. If we had a Slack app, by the way, I should make that. If we had a Slack app, we could just write it straight in there right now. We could actually maybe find one right now if we're allowed to, but I'm not sure if we're allowed to set that up in real time in 10 minutes. So this is basically a way of saying you can make this kind of stuff really quickly. You can prototype things. You can reframe what you have already in a matter of minutes, as long as you know how the API works and it's easy to like build out. You can see on the side here we have like a Yara scan app as well, so you can kind of like pass the same file into it. Analyze file. We can do like exec dot. That's it. I think it's exec.file ID. And this one will send it to the Yara as well to see if you can get some result from it. So you can do this with a lot of things at the same time. Run them in parallel. We have last line here, sandbox, right? You can do the same thing. Send the file into it. So all of a sudden, we just made this workflow into something that can handle any file anywhere. The only issue is we don't have anything to send it to right now. So like we can even send an email, like that's possible as well, entirely possible. If there's a hit, right? And then we can compound this and send it to whoever it needs to go to. But this workshop is not for that. I just wanted to show all the basics of Shuffle. That's what it's about. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of everything. I wanted to show the powerfulness of the app creator, which is so important to me because it's so hard to explain it to people. But if I can show it like this, even like, so for the get file result, I had no idea how to use that one, but apparently it just worked. And that's what I love, when it just works. And it does that most of the time for me at this point, because now it's been tested and vetted for so long. So let's get back to what Garanis was saying, actually. You were saying something about multiple loops. So to me, it doesn't seem so hard anymore. So it used to be hard. Now it's not so hard anymore. And the reason for that is you can just do this again in theory, right? So this one is sending a file into this one right now. Sending the file is created into the Shuffle workflow. From there, it's running this workflow, which now looks like a mess, of course. But now say there are, how many results would there be from those files in this one, right? Say you got your, let's do it, just a prototype. I'm not gonna make this work right now. We don't have time for that. Here's the Outlook web application. You get the email, You can send, let's see, get emails and get 10 of them or something. And as you get the emails, you parse through each one of them. And this workflow will now, so like the other workflow will then handle the email itself. I'll show you another workflow I have for this in the last 9 minutes. When you get to the other one, you can do the same thing, right? You can, in this one, you can have like, oh, let's check all the attachments, right? And in the next one again, let's check, I don't know, let's check all the files within the zip. So you can go lower and lower into this. The hardest part right now about all of this is like what you do when you get to the bottom. How do you get all that information back to the top? And we are working on that, of course. But this is, you know as well as I have that we've been struggling with files and sub workflows for only like a month and a half. So it's we're not at that point yet, but I'm sure in like the next month we'll find a way to do that properly. So yeah, now we basically touched upon every normal aspect of Shuffle. We haven't touched, there's a lot of stuff I can add in the end here. I'm just going to jump into presentation mode again for a bit because I have this important slide right here, which is about what we didn't cover. I'm thinking later I'll probably do more workshops or more videos or some way of explaining these aspects in better ways and going deep into each one of them. Because like debugging is a whole different nightmare if you want to build stuff at scale. The same goes for app creation and configuration. Like there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that's like environment variables and how do you scale it with load balancers and how do you set up multiple databases and make that work together. And as well as how do you work with this and Shuffle Cloud at the same time. All of this stuff comes together basically over time, but like right now I wanted to just cover the basics. So now in the end I just want to show you guys something that to me is kind of like an exciting part of this, where this is basically just a way of something that we will do in the future, which will help a lot of people get started with Shuffle, I believe, as long as we start making proper use cases. And at this point, we do have some of those. We do have proper use cases, but we don't have them transferable yet. So that means if you don't use VirusTotal, we don't have something for you because you might use this delivery service. But what we're doing is we are creating skeleton workflows that works for exactly what they should work for, but they're not ready to be transferred to your system yet because we don't have everything we need for that yet. So by uploading apps or workflows, which is what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go into workflows right here. I have a lot of them, as you can see, which I've made over the last year, but I have a couple of them that are saved right here. Didn't actually mean to upload that one yet. See, just deleting a workflow. So here you can import workflows in general, and you can import many at the same time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in here. I'm going to just take all of these and upload them. So this might take a minute, just because it needs to build them out. And there's a lot of stuff happening in the background for them. There we go. Okay, so they're built. So the thing that Shuffle isn't telling you right now is that these don't actually work right now. They're not ready. But if you want to make them ready really easily, in an easy fashion, what you can do is you can go into the admin view up here and go into app authentication. So this is the new thing. This is really new. This is from like the last 2 weeks. After importing all of those, these are all the apps you need. So if you want these workflows to work, all you need to do is fill out these authentications, and then all your workflows work, basically. So it's creating everything and making it ready for you. And I'll show you that just quickly. So like say this one, this is the Hive webhook handler. And what it does is it gets webhooks from the Hive. But I imported a workflow now that's not ready. It's not prepared to do everything that you want it to do. And you can see that because you can see the Hive there is red. It's very red actually. And the reason it's red, you can click it and you'll see. Requires authentication app authentication doesn't exist. These are the errors it finds. for this one. I know the errors don't look the best right there, but basically there's no authentication is what it's shouting about. So now, how do I fix this? Do I have to go into each workflow and do this? No, I don't like doing that. I like efficiency. So to fix this workflow, if I just refresh again, now it's still red. Everything is still red. It's not been fixed. But if I go in here now and I do this, I go here, there's the hive, because the hive is the red one right here. And for the hive, you just go over here, and where it's you see like this edit thing, just click it and type in something new. So like the hive API key. So this is going to work obviously, but this is a proof of concept, so you'll get it. URL is like HTTP localhost 9000 or something. And then we submit it, and now it's saved. And as you can see now, so some of these are gray. And this is like a really important new thing that's come with Shuffle actually. This button, what it does is it sets this authentication for every workflow you have. And this is a way of like define the hive, okay, send it to all the hive nodes. So right now it says 0 actions and zero workflows. And this one still has an error. Both of these two are red. But if I just click this one now, set in every workflow, it's updated. It's now prepared 7 workflows with the hive, and it's set it in 10 actions for the API key and the URL. And now if I just refresh this one, which is the same one with errors, these should, okay, they seem to have errors still. Okay, that's another bug. We found like 3-4 bugs today, so this is a good session, I feel like. But these are tiny bugs. These are visual bugs, basically. But it has authentication now, so it actually works. The whole thing works. I can just save and it's ready. And from here, the whole workflow can just run. And the same goes for everything else. I can do the same for all of this. I can do the same for Cortex, for AWS S3 buckets, for AWS web application firewalls, for Splunk, for EC2, etc. And that's basically it. That's this is like the latest and greatest from Shuffle, and this will lead into really good things in the future, because you can redefine these into being, instead of the hive, you use like ServiceNow or whatever platform you like in your enterprise. And they will be self-defined, and you can fix this really easily. You can assign things really fast, basically. You can just click here and it's setting it in every place, like here as well. This one is setting everywhere. And these are the ways that we can handle basically anything with Shuffle over time. It's about getting new people involved, importing good workflows, making good use cases. I'm sorry we didn't get to do that today and make proper use cases actually. So I'm just going to jump into the chat here just to see, because now to me, this is basically over. We are finished. It's been a successful day to me. I've been able to explain most of what I wanted to explain. If you have any questions, I'll stay around for at least like the next 10, 15, 20 minutes. If you want to have a chat, just reach out to me anywhere. I realize that now I should have had that in the slides as well. But in general, you can find me on Twitter, on GitHub, everywhere under my same name that you saw earlier, and you can see all the references in the slides to the documentation and where everything is for Shuffle, and myself as well. So thank you very much for coming today. It's been a great day of trying this. This has been both exciting and scary at first, the first 30 minutes, plus a lot of technical issues didn't make it better. But in the end, we got through it, and thanks a lot for coming.